1 week before the end of the world. Cold. The kind of cold that doesn't just bite your skin but sinks into your bones, freezing your marrow until you're nothing but a human popsicle. That was my last memory. The metallic clang of the lock being welded shut from the outside. The fading, triumphant laughter of my best friend, Mark, and my loving girlfriend, Sarah. They left me to rot in this underground tomb, stealing the last of our food and warmth. My last breath was a ragged, icy curse upon their souls. And then, I took another breath. A warm one, filled with the rich, slightly burnt aroma of artisan coffee and something sweet, like almond syrup. My eyes snapped open. The first thing I saw was a face I had sworn to tear apart, molecule by molecule. Mark. He was sitting across from me in a plush leather booth, a stupid, carefree grin plastered on his face. The cafe was one of those overpriced downtown joints we used to frequent, all minimalist decor and painfully cheerful baristas. "Dude, you okay?" Mark asked, snapping his fingers in front of my face. "You totally zoned out. Looked like you saw a ghost." I did. I saw my own. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a war drum beating a rhythm of pure, unadulterated rage. I looked down at my hands, resting on the polished oak table. They were clean, healthy, not the frostbitten claws I remembered. I flexed my fingers. They worked. Then, a searing heat erupted on the back of my right hand. It felt like a lit cigar being pressed into my skin. I flinched, biting back a grunt. When I looked again, the old silver ring I'd inherited from my grandfather, the one I was wearing when I died, was gone. In its place, a new tattoo was etched into my skin. A complex, intricate compass rose, its needle pointing a steady, unwavering north. A mental ping echoed in my thoughts. System. The arc initialized. Welcome back, host. Core function unlocked. Infinite dimensional space. The arc. Core function unlocked. Scan and replicate. Core function unlocked. Survival dashboard. Pre-apocalypse data loaded. The flood of information wasn't confusing. It was vindication. It was a divine confirmation that my hatred had been strong enough to bend reality itself. I wasn't dreaming. This wasn't some pre-death hallucination. I was back. Reborn. A week before the Z-Plague turned the world into a charnel house. A smirk, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, stretched my lips. Mark, the complete fool, mistook it for me snapping out of my daze. "There he is," he chuckled, taking a sip of his latte. "Lost you there for a second. Anyway, I was saying, Sarah's already at the theater. We gotta bolt if we want to catch the previews for that new superhero flick. She's been hyping it for weeks." Sarah. The name tasted like ash and betrayal in my mind. The image of her face, twisted in a cruel, mocking smile as she helped Mark seal my tomb, was burned onto the back of my eyelids. That face would be the last thing she saw before I snuffed out her miserable existence. I met Mark's clueless, expectant gaze. My voice, when it came out, was steady, devoid of any warmth. "You know what, Mark? You're right. We should go." His face lit up. "Yeah. Awesome. Let's..." "But this time," I cut him off, my smile widening into something that made his own falter. "The movie is going to be very, very different." The air between us went from casual to arctic in a nanosecond. He stared at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What? What are you talking about, man? It's just a movie." "Oh, you sweet summer child. You have no idea." I didn't bother explaining. What was the point? Explaining quantum physics to a hamster would be more productive. I stood up, my movement smooth and deliberate. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was in control. Not starving, not freezing, not helpless. I was the one holding all the cards. "Something came up," I said, a perfect dismissal. I tossed a $20 bill on the table. It was more than enough for our coffees. Generosity was a luxury, and right now I felt luxurious as hell. "I've got things to do. You two have fun." I turned and walked away without a backward glance. I could feel his bewildered stare on my back. He was probably thinking I was being weird, maybe having a bad day, or that we had some sort of stupid argument he'd forgotten. Let him think that. The confusion was the appetizer. The main course of his despair was still simmering. As I pushed through the glass door and onto the bustling sidewalk, the city noise hit me. Horns honking, people chattering on their phones, the distant wail of a siren. Normal, everyday life. A week. I had 1 week until this entire symphony of civilization imploded. My internal monologue was running at 1,000 miles per hour. First things first. Assets. My portfolio was decent, built on some lucky tech stocks. But decent wasn't going to cut it. I needed an obscene amount of money. I needed generational wealth crammed into a 7-day shopping spree. The survival dashboard in my head, a gift from my previous life's misery, lit up with stock tickers. pharma companies that would skyrocket, tech giants that would crumble into dust. All the answers to a test the rest of the world didn't even know it was about to take. Next, the fortress. Providence. The name popped into my head, fully formed. My shitty apartment was a death trap. The basement where I died last time? Forget it. A coffin. I needed a real sanctuary. In my past life, months into the deep freeze, I had heard whispers from a dying refugee about a prepper's paradise, a massive, secluded farm in a Montana valley built with a geothermal power source. Impossible to find, nearly impossible to assault, a legend. Well, legends are just facts you haven't bought yet. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I ignored the confused text already popping up from Mark. Do WTF? Sarah's pissed. Call me. Delete, delete, delete. A quick search for remote, large acreage properties in Montana with potential geothermal access. Bingo. A handful of listings. One stood out immediately. 3,000-acre Big Sky Ranch in the Gallatin Valley. Utterly private. Single access road. On-site deep well water source. The asking price was steep, but it would be pocket change soon. The Z-Plague was the first domino. The Great Deluge and perpetual storms would follow. Then the flash ice age that killed me. Geothermal energy wasn't a luxury. It was the only long-term ticket to not freezing to death. My mind raced, laying out the blueprints. Reinforced concrete walls for the main house and barn. A multi-level subterranean bunker beneath the entire complex. Hydroponics, aquaponics, workshops. A state-of-the-art medical bay. I would need to hire the most discreet, high-end construction contractor, slap a fat NDA on them, and pay them enough to get it done in record time, framing it as a paranoid billionaire's passion project. A vibration in my pocket interrupted my empire building. It wasn't a text. It was a call. The caller ID read, Goldman Sachs Investment Services. Perfect timing. I answered, my voice the epitome of calm authority. Ethan Thorne speaking. Mr. Thorne, good afternoon. A slightly flustered voice said on the other end. It was my financial advisor, a young guy named Peterson, who probably thought my investment strategy was throw a dart at a board. Sir, I'm calling to confirm the execution orders you placed online this morning. They are, well, they're highly unusual, sir. I leaned against the wall of a building, watching the oblivious crowd stream by. Unusual how, Peterson? You've ordered a full liquidation of your entire stock portfolio. Apple, Google, all of it. And then, you've instructed us to take the entire capital, leverage it to the absolute legal maximum, and use it to short sell half the S&P 500? Specifically targeting travel, insurance, and commercial real estate sectors? He sounded like I'd just asked him to help me burn down an orphanage. Sir, with all due respect, this is financial suicide. The market is at an all-time high. A move like this, if you're wrong, you won't just be broke, you'll be in debt for the rest of your life. I let out a soft chuckle. The rest of my life, huh? Don't you worry about that, Peterson. I looked at the compass on my hand. The needle was steady. My path was clear. I had the cheat codes to reality. I was playing a video game, and my past life was the strategy guide. Peterson, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. This isn't a gamble, it's a certainty. Execute the orders. All of them. There was a moment of dead air on the line. I could almost hear the poor guy sweating, probably picturing his career going up in flames. Yes, Mr. Thorne, he finally squeaked out, his voice a full octave higher. As you wish. The order will be executed. I hung up. A man bumped into me, spilling a bit of his latte. Hey, watch it, he grumbled. I didn't even look at him. A week from now, he'd probably be one of them. A feral, mindless creature, driven by a single instinct, to consume. Or maybe he'd just be dead. It didn't matter. They were all dead men walking. I, on the other hand, had never felt more alive. My shopping list was long, my time was short, and my wallet was about to become infinitely deep. The age of man was ending. My age was just beginning. 6 days before the world ends. Hanging up on Peterson felt like hitting the start button on a speed run of life. The stock market was a guarantee, but it was slow. A dinosaur. I needed cash, and I needed it yesterday. My memories of the before times weren't just about betrayal and ice. They were a roadmap of every financial explosion and implosion. While the S&P 500 bleed out would make me rich, the real jackpot, the insane, overnight, what the hell just happened money, was elsewhere. Bitcoin. Right now, it was hovering at a respectable, but not yet legendary, price. In my past life, in exactly 2 days, a combination of a whale purchase and some favorable and completely bullshit regulatory news from Asia, would send it to the moon. A 500% spike in less than 24 hours. A once-in-a-generation pump. I found a bench, ignoring the looks from people who saw a guy in a simple hoodie and jeans intensely focused on his phone like he was trying to launch nukes. I might as well have been. Every last cent of my liquid cash, every line of credit I could instantly access, was funneled into a crypto exchange. Leverage? Maxed out. To any sane person, this was the financial equivalent of dousing yourself in gasoline and lighting a match. For me, it was just lighting the fuse on my new life. A text from Sarah buzzed in. Ethan, WTF is wrong with you? Mark said you acted like a total psycho. I'm waiting. I stared at her name. The rage was still there, a cold, hard diamond in my chest. But right now, it was a distraction. I focused my mind on the arc space. It felt like flexing a new muscle. I imagined her text, her name, her entire digital existence in my phone being crumpled into a ball and tossed into a black hole. With a mental flick, I blocked her number. Mark's too. Clean. Efficient. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and takeout food in my sad little apartment. I didn't sleep. I just watched the numbers. The news tickers at the bottom of financial channels were my new favorite show. Then, it happened. Just like I remembered. Breaking. Asian tech giant announces major corporate treasury investment in Bitcoin. The chart on my screen, which had been a gentle wave, turned into a solid green wall. The numbers on my exchange account started spinning like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. My initial modest six-figure investment ballooned. 1 million. 5. 10. It didn't stop. By the time the markets opened in New York, the short sells Peterson had executed against my, quote, financial suicide orders were also hemorrhaging money for everyone else. For me, they were printing it. A call from a private number. It was Peterson. He sounded like he'd just run a marathon while being chased by bears. Mr. Thorne, he stammered, his voice cracking. I don't understand. The market is in free fall. The travel and insurance sectors just collapsed. And your crypto position. Sir, your net worth has just passed the 9-figure mark. It's over $250 million. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the cracked ceiling of my apartment. Is that all, Peterson? I was hoping for more. Keep the positions open, squeeze them dry. I could hear the man audibly gulp on the other end. Yay. Yes, sir. As you wish, sir. He called me sir 3 times. Last week he called me buddy. Money talks. Or in this case, it makes others stutter. 4 days before the world ends, time to shop. My first stop wasn't a gun store or a military surplus depot. That would come later. The foundation of any apocalypse empire isn't bullets. It's calories. I drove my beat-up sedan to the largest wholesale warehouse club in the state, a place a lot like Costco but for business owners. I walked past the families arguing over giant tubs of mayonnaise and went straight to the manager's office. The manager was a guy in his late 40s named Barry, with a cheap tie cinched too tight and an air of self-importance that only a mid-level manager can truly perfect. He looked me up and down, taking in my jeans and hoodie, and his smile became a thin, condescending line. Can I help you? He asked, his tone suggesting I had wandered into the wrong section. Yes, I said, my voice flat. I want to buy your entire stock of instant noodles, canned meats, canned vegetables, rice, and flour. All of it. Barry blinked. Then he let out a short, barking laugh. Son, do you know where you are? This is a wholesale center. You mean you want a pallet? We can arrange that. No, Barry, I said, enjoying the way his eyes widened slightly when I used his name from his name tag. Not a pallet. I mean your entire inventory. Everything in the warehouse and whatever you have in your off-site storage. I also want every bottle of water, every roll of toilet paper, and all your first aid supplies. The clown stared at me like I'd just grown a second head. That's impossible. That's millions of dollars of inventory. It's for our members. This is not a joke, kid. Kid. Cute. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just reached into my pocket and pulled out the brand new, jet black, heavy-as-sin credit card the bank had messengered to me that morning. It wasn't a platinum card. It was the card they give to people who can buy countries. I slid it across his desk. Barry's eyes, trained to recognize status and money, locked onto it. The condescending smirk on his face didn't just vanish. It was annihilated, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure shock. He picked up the card like it was a holy relic. The color drained from his face. Is this real? He whispered. Run it, I said. and I've got 3 semi-trucks arriving in 1 hour to start loading. I'll pay your staff double time to get it done by tonight, or I can just go to your competitor across the town." The transformation was glorious to watch. The pompous mid-level tyrant vanished, replaced by the most helpful ass-kissing servant you've ever seen. "Yes, sir. Of course, Mr. Thorne. Right away, sir. We can absolutely make that happen. Anything you need, sir." For the next 8 hours, the warehouse was a whirlwind of activity. Forklifts zipped back and forth, loading pallet after pallet onto the trucks I had hired. The other shoppers, the small business owners, and quote, savvy bulk buyers, stood there with their jaws on the floor, watching as entire aisles were stripped bare. I heard them whispering, "Who the hell is that guy? Must be some tech billionaire weirdo. What's anyone going to do with 50,000 rolls of toilet paper? What a waste of money. He could buy a damn yacht." Fools. They were right. I could buy a yacht. A week from now, they'd trade that same yacht for a single can of the beans I was loading up. As each truck was filled, I directed it to a series of rented storage units on the outskirts of the city. In the privacy of each unit, I'd place my hand on the towering stacks of supplies. One thought. Into the ark. With a silent shimmer that only I could perceive, tons of material would vanish into my infinite, time-frozen dimension. The trucks would leave empty, ready for another run. My drivers just thought I had the most efficient unloading crew in human history. To them, I was just an eccentric rich guy. It was the perfect cover. 3 days before the world ends. Phase 1, food and basic supplies, was complete. Now for the shelter. Providence. I was back in my apartment, which now felt laughably inadequate. A cardboard box in a world about to be hit by a hurricane. On my laptop, I pulled up the file for Aegis Secure Solutions. They weren't your average builders. Their website was minimalist and professional, filled with corporate speak about asset protection, risk mitigation, and hostile environment architecture. In simple terms, they built panic rooms for the ultra-rich and fortified compounds for paranoid dictators. Perfect. I made the call. A crisp, professional female voice answered. Aegis Solutions, how may I help you? I need to speak to whoever is in charge of new private contracts, I said. My name is Ethan Thorne. I've recently acquired the Big Sky Ranch property in Gallatin Valley, Montana. I need to begin retrofitting immediately. The budget is not a concern. The timeline is. There was a pause. The property name was a signal. It meant I was serious. One moment, Mr. Thorne. A few seconds later, a deep, gravelly voice came on the line. This is Marcus. I handle special projects. You said the timeline is the primary issue? That's right, Marcus, I said, pulling up the blueprints I'd sketched out in my mind. I'm emailing you the initial schematics now. Phase 1. I want a 10-meter deep subterranean foundation dug under the main house and barn. Reinforced concrete. Full EMP shielding. While that's happening, I want the perimeter secured. A 3-meter high concrete wall, topped with razor wire, and an electrified fence on the exterior. I need this started within 24 hours. The man on the other end was silent for a long moment. I could hear a faint tapping, probably him looking at the schematics. Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice now laced with professional interest. This is not a panic room. This is a military-grade bunker. A project of this scale, with this kind of aggressive start time, it requires an extreme premium and absolute discretion. I'm transferring a $50 million deposit to your account as we speak, I said, authorizing the wire. That covers the premium. The rest is for getting it done. I'll double the final contract price if Phase 1 is completed within the next 30 days. The only condition is a non-disclosure agreement so ironclad your entire company will cease to exist if a single word gets out. Are we in agreement? The sound on the other end was a low whistle. Mr. Thorne, our crews will be on site by sunrise tomorrow, 2 days before the world ends. The world was still blissfully unaware. On the news, they were finally giving the strange flu a name. Z-plague. They said it was contained. They said it had a low mortality rate. They said there was no need to panic. The talking heads on TV were debating whether travel restrictions were an overreaction. I was watching this, a cold smile on my face, while finalizing an order for 10 commercial-grade diesel generators and enough fuel to fill an Olympic swimming pool. They were being delivered directly to the Montana site. Everything was moving like clockwork. Then, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number, but one I recognized from a life I was trying to forget. My stepmother. The woman who married my father for his money, and then kicked me out of the house the day after his funeral. I let it ring a few times before answering, putting on my most neutral voice. Hello? A sickly sweet voice oozed through the speaker. Ethan, darling, is that you? Oh, I'm so glad I finally reached you. It's me. Me. As if I could forget the greedy old witch. What do you want, Catherine? I asked, my tone as cold as the grave she'd have happily put me in. Oh, so formal, she tittered. I was just talking to some of my friends at the country club, and you will not believe what I heard. They said my little Ethan, my sweet boy, had suddenly come into a fabulous fortune, some kind of genius stock market play. I always knew you were a smart boy. I told your father so, bless his soul. I was thinking, now that you're doing so well, you wouldn't forget your dear old mother who raised you, would you? The roof on the summer house is simply a disaster. I listened to her drone on, her voice a grating screech of entitlement and greed. She was an insect, a parasite, one of the many I would have to crush in this new world. In my last life I would have been angry. Now I just felt a profound sense of pity for her stupidity. She was worried about her summer house roof. I, on the other hand, was building an ark to survive the goddamn apocalypse. The scale of our concerns was so different, it was almost funny. Ethan, are you there, darling? I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. I'm here, Catherine. We should talk. In fact, why don't you and your lovely daughter come visit me in a week or so? We'll have a lot to catch up on. I could hear the glee in her voice. The old hag thought she'd hit the jackpot again. Oh, Ethan, that would be wonderful. Yes, I said, looking out the window at the unsuspecting city. It will be. I hung up. The feeling of the compass rose on my hand, a steady, reassuring presence. Let her come. Let all of them come. The rats always scurry when the ship starts to sink. This time, however, the ship was mine, and I was the one setting the traps. 5 days before the world ended. The new house was a rental, a ridiculously oversized McMansion in a gated community where the biggest neighborhood drama was someone putting their trash cans out an hour too early. It was a temporary base of operations, a sterile, soulless place. I was already turning into a miniature fortress. But first, I had to deal with the pests. My phone call to the old hag had worked exactly as intended. It was like ringing a dinner bell for vultures. Less than 24 hours later, a gleaming white sedan that screamed, I'm in crippling debt to own this, pulled into my driveway. Out stepped Catherine, my ex-stepmother, draped in a pastel pantsuit that was trying way too hard. Trailing behind her like a badly trained puppy was her son, my stepbrother Kevin, a walking personification of entitlement with a haircut that must have cost more than my first car. I watched them from the large bay window, my face a blank mask. In my past life, their arrival would have filled me with a familiar mix of anxiety and resentment. Now, I just felt a clinical sort of amusement. They were lab rats, and I was about to run an experiment. I opened the door before they could ring the bell, giving them my best neutral, slightly confused expression. Catherine. Kevin, what a surprise. Ethan, darling. Catherine's voice was a high-pitched assault on the ears. She lunged forward for a hug, a cloud of cloying perfume enveloping me. I subtly sidestepped, letting her stumble slightly. Oh, don't be so stuffy. We were just so thrilled to hear your good news. We had to come and celebrate with you. Translation. We heard you hit the jackpot, and we're here for our cut. Kevin just grunted, his eyes already scanning the foyer, no doubt calculating the square footage. Nice place, he commented, his tone implying it was barely adequate. It's temporary, I said flatly. Tea? I led them to the sitting room, a cavernous space with furniture I hadn't chosen and didn't care about. I went through the motions of preparing a pot of high-end Gyokuro tea, one of my first pleasure purchases. The ritual was calming, a deliberate contrast to the storm of greed brewing in front of me. Catherine started before the water was even hot. Ethan, your father, bless his soul, would be so proud to see you finally making something of yourself. I always knew you had it in you. I told him, I said, that boy just needs a little push, a little guidance. You remember all those years I took care of you? I poured the steaming, jade-colored liquid into 3 delicate cups, my hands perfectly steady. I remember you losing my school trip permission slips. I remember you telling my father I was rebellious when I questioned why my college fund seemed to be shrinking. Oh yeah, I remember. Exactly, she chirped, taking a sip of the tea and almost choking. It probably wasn't sweet enough for her. And now that you're in a position to give back, let's say. We're family after all. There's a certain responsibility. Kevin, who had been scrolling on his phone looking bored, finally perked up. This was his cue. Yeah, bro. Mom's been having a tough time. The club fees went up again. And my car, it's getting old. I saw this sick new Porsche Panamera online. It's not even that much, for a guy like you. He said it with the effortless confidence of someone who had never worked for a single thing in his life. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The flavor was complex, a world away from the bitter dregs of my past life. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm. Catherine's painted-on smile began to twitch. Kevin's bravado faltered. Finally, I placed my cup down with a soft click. "Let me ask you a question, Catherine," I said, my voice low and devoid of any warmth. "Were you ever actually my mother, or was I just a long-term, underperforming asset from your marriage to my father that suddenly, miraculously, started showing a profit?" Her face went pale under its thick layer of foundation. What kind of a thing is that to say? Ethan, I raised you." "Did you?" I leaned forward slightly. "Let's talk about that dwindling college fund." I remember quite clearly. Junior year of high school. On October 26th, a transfer of exactly $7,540 was made from my education trust to an account for quote, home renovations. A week later, you had a new designer wardrobe. Coincidence? The blood drained from her face completely. She looked like a ghost. That was a loan. I paid it back." "You're a terrible liar," I stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. "You gambled it away on a can't-miss stock tip from one of your country club friends. The stock was a pump and dump. You lost every penny. You didn't raise me. You siphoned resources from me like a parasite." Kevin jumped to his feet. "Hey, you can't talk to my mom like that, you asshole." I didn't even look at him. My eyes were locked on Catherine. "The door is over there," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that was colder than any shout. "Get your sniveling offspring and get the fuck out of my house before I have security drag you out." For a moment, pure, unadulterated rage flashed across Catherine's face. The mask was gone. This was the real her, the greedy, cornered rat. But she was smart enough to know when she was beaten. She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking. "You'll regret this, Ethan. I'll tell everyone what a monster you are. An ungrateful, horrible child." "Please do," I said with a thin smile. "Try to cancel a man who is about to become a king. Go post about it on Facebook. I'm sure the 5 likes you get from your bridge club friends will utterly destroy me. Now get out." They practically fled, Kevin shooting me one last hateful glare before being pulled along by his mother. I watched them get back into their Detmobile and speed away. I picked up my teacup, the porcelain still warm. The tea tasted even better now. Later that afternoon, I stood on the manicured lawn and watched the Aegis Solutions crew work. They weren't your typical construction workers. They were quiet, efficient, and moved with a purpose that bordered on military. They were swapping out every window on the ground floor with triple-pane bullet and shatter-resistant glass. The elegant French doors were being replaced with a solid steel model disguised with a wood veneer. My neighbors, of course, were noticing. Mr. Henderson from across the street was pretending to trim his hedges, his eyes glued to the activity. Mrs. Gable from next door was peeking through her blinds. I could almost hear their gossipy thoughts. "Who is this new guy? Is he in the mob? Is he a doomsday prepper?" "Huh. Congratulations, you're half right." I let them stare. Their petty concerns were background noise. On a waterproof tablet, I was reviewing the live feed from the Montana site. The excavation was already well underway, massive earth movers digging a giant 10-meter deep hole where the Providence bunker would soon reside. Progress was ahead of schedule. Everything was going according to plan. 3 days before the world ended. The world was getting twitchy. The news couldn't ignore it anymore. The Z-Plague, as they had officially branded it, had its first confirmed cases on U.S. soil. Seattle, Los Angeles, New York. The talking heads on TV were a joke. "Officials are urging the public not to panic," one blonde anchor said with a plastic smile. "The CDC assures us that the situation is contained and that this virus has a low transmission rate." I snorted, taking a bite of a perfectly cooked medium-rare steak I'd made for dinner. Low transmission rate? In my last life, it went from 3 cases to 3 million in a week. The first signs of societal breakdown were appearing, exactly as I remembered. Toilet paper was sold out everywhere. You couldn't find a bottle of hand sanitizer or a face mask for love or money. People were starting to get that edgy, suspicious look in their eyes at the grocery store. It was the beginning of the end, and they thought the biggest problem was wiping their asses. Fools. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a number I hadn't seen in years, but one I recognized instantly. My actual father. He and Catherine had divorced long before he passed, a messy affair that had left him with his health and not much else. He was a good man, A simple man. Too simple for the world that was coming. I answered, my tone instinctively softening for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Dad? His voice was gruff, but laced with a familiar worry. Ethan, it's me. Listen, I got a crazy call from Catherine. She was screaming her head off. Said you threw her out, called her a parasite. Said you'd gone crazy with your new money. There was a pause. Son, you okay? You know how she gets. And with all this weird flu stuff going around, I just worry. I looked out my new bulletproof window at the darkening sky. The streetlights of the doomed suburb flickered on, casting long shadows. My father was worried about me arguing with the shrew. He had no idea. He had no idea what was coming for him, for all of them. I'm fine, Dad, I said, a plan already forming in my mind. A plan I hadn't considered before. Everything is under control. But you're right, things are getting weird. We should talk. Soon. In this new world, my kindness was a limited resource, reserved only for those who deserved it. And my father, for all his flaws, had always deserved it. Maybe the ark had room for one more. 3 days before the world ended. My phone conversation with Dad left a strange taste in my mouth. Not bad, just unfamiliar. It was the residue of an emotion I thought I had purged. Genuine affection. It was a vulnerability, but a necessary one. I made a mental note. Plan A was to get him to Montana. Plan B was to build him his own mini-fortress wherever he was. The ark had a lot of concrete and steel in it. But that was a problem for future me. Present me had a much more immediate and, frankly, more annoying problem. My neighbors. The high-tech security installations hadn't gone unnoticed. In a neighborhood where the most exciting event was the annual chili cook-off, my house was now the main attraction. Cars would slow down as they passed. Power-walking moms would stop to stretch on the sidewalk, craning their necks. It was only a matter of time before they organized. The tipping point came in the form of a crisp, passive-aggressive flyer left on my doorstep. Emergency Neighborhood Watch and Community Cohesion Meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. At the cul-de-sac. Let's keep our community safe and beautiful, together. Translation: we're going to publicly shame the new weirdo with the bulletproof windows. I actually laughed. They had no idea what unsafe was about to mean. At 7 p.m. sharp, I strolled out of my house, intentionally wearing a pair of comfortable sweatpants and a plain black t-shirt. I looked like I'd just rolled off the couch, the complete opposite of the pearl-clutching, Lululemon-clad mob gathered at the end of my driveway. The ringleader, a woman in her 50s with a severe blonde bob that looked like a helmet, stepped forward. Her name was Carol, and I already knew everything I needed to about her from a single glance. She was the final boss of all Karens. Mr. Thorne, she began, her voice dripping with faux concern. Thank you for joining us. A few of us, she gestured vaguely at the 20 or so nosy Parkers, have been feeling a little unsettled lately. Really? By what? I asked, feigning ignorance. Well, she said, choosing her words carefully. The way. Extensive modifications to your property. The new windows, the steel doors, it's all a bit much. It gives off a very unwelcoming vibe. It's affecting the aesthetic of the entire street. A man next to her, who I recognized as the hedge trimmer Mr. Henderson, chimed in. She's right. It looks like a fortress. What are you expecting? A zombie apocalypse? He laughed, and a few others chuckled nervously. I just stared at him until his laughter died in his throat. The silence was delicious. Oh, you sweet summer child. If you only knew. Carol cleared her throat, regaining control. Our point, Ethan, may I call you Ethan, is that a community is built on trust and openness. These fortifications send a message of fear and selfishness. We're all in this together. If something were to happen, we should be helping each other, not locking ourselves away. Hear, hear! Someone shouted from the back. This was the moment. The opening I was waiting for. The moral high ground they thought they stood on was about to become a sinkhole. Trust and openness. I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. I agree. Community is important. I pulled out my phone, tapped a few icons, and turned to face the blank white garage door of my house. A low hum came from a small, discreet projector I'd installed under the eaves that morning. An image flickered to life, illuminating the garage door like a movie screen. The image was crystal clear 4K footage from one of my security cameras, time-stamped just 2 days prior. It showed Carol's prize-winning poodle, Sir Fluffington III, trotting onto my perfectly manicured lawn, squatting, and leaving a generous, steaming pile right next to my walkway. The video then showed Carol, not 10 feet away, pointedly looking at her phone before tugging the leash and walking away, leaving the landmine for me to find. Carol's face went from pale to beet red in under a second. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Wait, there's more, I said calmly, swiping on my phone. The scene changed. Now it was footage from a camera aimed at my driveway. It showed the teenage son of another neighbor, a loudmouth who was currently standing in the back with his arms crossed, hucking a rock at the window of my parked SUV. It bounced off harmlessly, thanks to the 3M security film I'd had applied. The kid looked shocked for a second, then flipped the bird at my house before running off. And my personal favorite, I said, a grin finally breaking through my neutral facade. The projector showed infrared footage from the previous night. It depicted Mr. Henderson, the quote, zombie apocalypse comedian, sneaking over in the dark and trying to pry open one of my new shed's windows with a crowbar. He gave up after a few minutes of pathetic, fruitless effort. The crowd was dead silent now. The only sound was the gentle whirring of the projector. I turned the projector off and faced the stunned mob. I let my gaze drift from Carol's horrified face to the rock-throwing kid's dad, who now looked physically ill, to Mr. Henderson, who seemed to be trying to melt into the pavement. You want to talk about community? About trust? About helping each other? My voice was low, but it cut through the evening air like a razor. Community starts with not letting your dog shit on your neighbor's lawn, Carol. Trust starts with not having your delinquent kid vandalize my property. And helping each other sure as hell doesn't involve trying to break into my shed with a crowbar in the middle of the night, Dave. I used Henderson's first name. It hit him like a physical blow. I have 32 cameras, I continued, my voice flat and cold. They are recording in 4K, 24/7. They have night vision and thermal imaging. I have every single one of you on video, every day, doing something petty, stupid, or illegal. I have footage of your affairs, your late-night screaming matches, your piss-poor attempts at hiding your empty liquor bottles from your spouses. I have built a veritable library of your hypocrisy. I let that sink in. So let's get one thing straight, I said, my voice hardening. This is my property. What I do with it is my business. You are worried about aesthetics and unwelcoming vibes. I am worried about survival. Your opinions are noted, and they have been discarded. This meeting is over. Get off my lawn, all of you. No one moved for a second. They were completely cowed. Then, like a flock of startled birds, they broke apart, scurrying away in humiliated silence. Carol shot me a look of pure hatred before practically dragging her husband back to their house. I walked back inside, a feeling of deep, profound satisfaction warming my chest. It wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about exposing their sanctimonious bullshit for the whole world, or at least the whole cul-de-sac, to see. Later that night, I sat in my temporary command center, a spare bedroom I'd converted. A bank of monitors showed me every angle of the property. I watched the live feeds as my neighbors occasionally peeked through their curtains, their silhouettes filled with a new kind of fear. Not fear of some abstract threat, but fear of me. Good. Fear was a better deterrent than any wooden fence. On one screen, I finalized an order online. It was a commercial-grade electric fence system, low profile and designed to be installed just inside an existing structure. It would be invisible behind my decorative white picket fence. The specs promised a non-lethal but unforgettable 10,000-volt shock. On another screen, I was researching sprinkler systems. Not for watering the grass. I found what I was looking for. A high-pressure agricultural misting system. With a few custom modifications and a separate reservoir tank, it could be repurposed. In my head, I'd already christened it the Get the Fuck Off My Lawn 3000. I added a bulk order of capsaicin and a powerful industrial-grade skin irritant to my cart. Non-lethal, but it would make a crowd of rioters wish they'd chosen a different house to bother. The world outside my fortified bubble was continuing its nosedive. The president had just declared a national medical state of emergency. Schools were closing indefinitely. The news was a 24/7 carousel of chaos. They showed footage from a Costco in California where a full-on brawl had broken out over the last pallet of bottled water. People screaming, punching, tearing open packages. It was pathetic. They were fighting over scraps while I sat here, sipping a 20-year-old single malt scotch, with enough supplies in the Ark to sustain a small city for a century. This was the contrast. This was the point. While they descended into animalistic panic, I would ascend. While they fought over toilet paper, I would be designing geothermal power plants. My phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting my reverie. I glanced at the screen. A series of messages had come through from a number I knew all too well. Sarah. The woman who, in another lifetime, had smiled as she left me to freeze to death. Sarah. Ethan? Babe, are you there? Sarah. OMG. Everything is going crazy. They just closed the university. Sarah, I'm really scared. Are you okay? Where are you? I stared at the messages, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. The prey was walking right back to the hunter. The first piece of trash from my past life was about to be taken out. I picked up the phone. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was going to be so much fun. Day 0. D-Day. The day the world went offline. I had my feet up on the ottoman, a Riedel wine glass swirling a deep crimson Bordeaux in my hand. On the 8K OLED screen mounted on the wall, the world was ending, live, and in stunning ultra-high definition. It was way better than Netflix. Breaking news. CDC confirms virus is airborne. Shelter in place. This is not a drill. The news anchor, a guy who usually reported on stock market fluctuations with the charisma of a wet cardboard box, was losing his damn mind. His tie was askew, sweat beaded on his forehead, and his voice was cracking. Behind him you could see chaos in the newsroom, people running, shouting. It was beautiful. I took a slow sip of the Chateau Margaux. It was sublime. A perfect pairing for the apocalypse. The steak sizzled on the plate beside me. A 5 Wagyu, pan-seared to a perfect medium rare, its fat rendered into a buttery, melt-in-your-mouth delight. The Ark kept it perfectly preserved, as if it had been butchered just this morning. The aroma of garlic, thyme, and sizzling fat filled my fortified living room, a stark contrast to the distant, tinny sounds of sirens and screams filtering through the soundproofed walls. My phone, which I'd left on the table, had been buzzing non-stop for the past hour. Group chats exploding with panic, memes turning into genuine terror. And, of course, Sarah's pathetic string of messages. I hadn't even bothered to read them. They were like spam emails from a past life. Delete. The TV broadcast glitched, switching to a shaky helicopter feed over downtown Los Angeles. It looked like a scene from a movie I'd seen a million times, only this was real. Cars were piled up on the freeways, some on fire. And you could see them. The Ferals. They weren't the slow, shuffling corpses from old movies. No, these things were fast. They moved with a twitchy, unnatural speed, sprinting, leaping, and swarming anything that still had a pulse. They were the Z-virus, on a lethal dose of meth and rage. The camera zoomed in on a small group of them tearing apart a police barricade, the officers falling back in a hail of useless gunfire. The Ferals just kept coming. So much for law and order, I thought, cutting off another piece of steak. It was perfect. The rich, marbled beef practically dissolved on my tongue. This is what vindication tasted like. It tasted like $100 steak, while the idiots who called me paranoid were getting turned into human Happy Meals. I remembered the faces of my neighbors from last night. Carol, the Queen Bee Karen. Dave Henderson, the wannabe burglar. All of them, with their petty concerns and sanctimonious bullshit about community. I wondered what they were doing right now. Probably huddled in their flimsy stick-and-plaster houses, clutching their useless decorative pillows, realizing the unwelcoming vibe of my steel doors was actually a pretty damn good idea. The lights in the house flickered once. Twice. Then, with a gentle hum, they died. The 8K TV screen went black. The warm glow of the living room vanished, leaving only the dim, hellish red glow from the fires downtown visible through the armored windows. For a split second, the neighborhood was plunged into absolute, primal darkness. The sirens died, the power grid giving up the ghost. The screams outside somehow sounded sharper, closer, without the buffering hum of civilization. Any other person would be pissing their pants right now. I just took another sip of wine. 3, 2, 1. A soft click echoed from the utility room. With a steady, reassuring hum, the lights snapped back on. The TV rebooted. The refrigerator in the kitchen resumed its quiet whirring. My backup system, a massive bank of solar-charged batteries connected to a diesel generator the size of a smart car, had kicked in seamlessly. My house was a self-contained island of light, electricity, and order in an ocean of darkness and chaos. I walked over to the main window and peeked through the blinds. The entire cul-de-sac was pitch black, a thick, oppressive darkness that swallowed everything. I could see panicked flickers of phone flashlights in some of the windows, darting around like captured fireflies. I could almost feel their terror. The sudden, gut-wrenching realization that they were well and truly fucked. No power, no internet, no police, no help coming. A small smirk played on my lips. Enjoy the Stone Age, assholes. I had enough diesel in my underground tank to power this entire block for a year, and enough solar panels to last even longer once the initial chaos died down. All of it for me. I went back to the sofa. The news channel was gone, replaced by a static emergency broadcast screen. Boring. I used my phone to cast a movie to the TV instead. John Wick. A classic. A story about a man of focus, commitment, and sheer fucking will. Relatable. The contrast was almost poetic. On the screen, Keanu Reeves was dispatching bad guys, with brutal efficiency. Outside my window, the real-world equivalent was happening, only way messier, and with a lot more screaming. And here I was, the sole member of the audience in the VIP box, enjoying dinner and a show. An alert popped up on my tablet, the central hub for my home security. Motion detected at the perimeter fence. I swiped to the camera feed. It was one of the ferals, a man, probably in his 30s, now just a thing of pure, mindless aggression. His eyes were milky white, his jaw unhinged, and he was clawing uselessly at the decorative white picket fence that hid the 10-volt electric deterrent behind it. He stumbled, touched the invisible wire, and was thrown back with a violent, full-body convulsion, smoke briefly rising from his hand. He didn't scream. He just got up, twitching, and shambled off into the darkness, looking for easier prey. System works, I noted, with satisfaction. I made a mental note to turn up the voltage later. No kill was the default setting, but I wasn't feeling particularly merciful. For the next hour, I finished my movie, cleaned my plate and glass, and put them in the dishwasher. A dishwasher. In the middle of the apocalypse. The sheer, unadulterated luxury of it was intoxicating. I was doom-scrolling through the last dying embers of the internet. Satellite feeds were still spotty when I saw the post that confirmed what I already knew from my previous life. The virus had mutated. The initial strain had a 24-hour incubation period. The new one? Less than an hour. That's why everything went to shit so fast. It wasn't a slow burn infection. It was a flash fire that consumed a city in an afternoon. Anyone caught outside? Anyone stuck in traffic? Anyone at the grocery store? They were all just walking dead. The entire social structure, from governments to neighborhood watch groups, had been predicated on having time to react. But time had just been deleted from the equation. The unprepared weren't just disadvantaged. They were already dead and just hadn't gotten the memo yet. That's when I heard it. It wasn't the sound of a feral. They clawed, they snarled, they threw themselves at things. This was different. This was a frantic, desperate human sound. Bang, bang, bang. The noise came from the front door. A heavy, rhythmic pounding of flesh and bone against reinforced steel. I calmly picked up my security tablet, tapped the icon for the front door camera, and there they were. The image was crystal clear in infrared. Rain had started to fall, mixing with the dirt and grime on their faces. It was Mark and Sarah. They looked like they'd crawled through hell and then rolled in its filth. Mark's fancy polo shirt was torn and stained with something dark. His arm was wrapped in a crude bandage that was soaked through. His face was a mask of pure terror. And Sarah. Oh, Sarah. The beautiful, treacherous bitch who had smiled as she left me to die. Her perfect blonde hair was matted with mud and blood. Her designer jacket was ripped at the shoulder. Tears and rain streamed down her face, carving clean paths through the grime. She was pounding on the door with both fists, her knuckles already raw and bleeding. She looked up, directly at the camera lens I knew was there. Her mouth opened, and though I couldn't hear her through the soundproofing, I could read her lips perfectly. Ethan, please, let us in. I watched them, my face a blank canvas. Mark was shouting something now, his expression wild, looking over his shoulder into the blackness of the street as if the devil himself was on his heels. They were pathetic. They were rats, fleeing a sinking world, scurrying back to the one man they had so gleefully betrayed. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. A smile that didn't reach my eyes, my past life's rage. The searing hatred I felt in that freezing dark cellar bubbled up not as hot anger, but as a chilling, delicious sense of anticipation. They hadn't come here seeking a savior, they'd come here seeking a judge. And court was now in session. I put the tablet down, picked up my half-empty glass of Bordeaux, and swirled it gently, watching the crimson liquid coat the sides. The opening act of my revenge was about to begin. This was going to be so much fun. Night 1. The world has officially logged off. The pounding on my front door was getting on my last nerve. It wasn't the sound itself. The reinforced steel alloy door, backed by a solid foot of concrete, barely transmitted a dull thud into my command center. No, it was the sheer F-tier level of cringe coming from the other side. On my main 55-inch monitor, split into a dozen security feeds, the front door cam showed the dynamic duo in all their pathetic glory. Ethan, please, Sarah wailed, her voice a shrill, desperate whine picked up by the high-fidelity microphone I'd installed. It's us, it's Sarah, I was so scared, I thought you were... "Oh God, just open the door." She was really laying it on thick, performing like her life depended on it, which I suppose it did. Her face, streaked with rain and filth, was aimed right at the camera lens. She was trying to look vulnerable, tragically beautiful. All I saw was the same lying sack of crap who left me to die freezing in a cellar. Beside her, Mark, the backstabbing bro, was playing his part. He had one arm slung over her shoulder in a protective gesture that was pure theater. "Bro, thank God you're okay," he yelled, his voice cracking with fake relief. "You wouldn't believe it out here. It's a bloodbath. We barely made it. We were driving and the car just died. Then these things, they were everywhere. We ran all the way here. We knew you'd be safe. You were always the smart one." The smart one. Right. The smart one, you two clowns, decided to use as a human sacrifice for an extra can of beans and a jacket. The audacity of this guy, trying to pull the best buds card after what he did. It was almost impressive in its shamelessness. I took a leisurely sip of the ice-cold Coke I'd just pulled from the mini-fridge next to my command chair. The fizz was sharp on my tongue. The leather of the chair was cool and comfortable. Outside, the world was ending. Inside, it was Tuesday. I watched them for another minute, letting them exhaust their opening script. It was like watching a terrible high school play. Sarah started sobbing, leaning heavily on Mark, who kept glancing nervously back into the pitch-black street. They were scared. Good. Fear was just the appetizer. My fingers danced over the touchscreen console in front of me. With a few taps, I rerouted the audio output. A soft click echoed from the speaker grill embedded next to the front door. Their frantic pounding stopped instantly. They both froze, staring at the speaker like it was the monolith from 2001, A Space Odyssey. I leaned into the microphone. My voice, amplified and broadcasted with crystal clarity into the stormy night, was devoid of any warmth, just pure, Arctic-chilled indifference. "Oh, Sarah? Mark? You two are still alive?" I let the question hang in the air for a perfect, agonizing second. What a shame. The color drained from their faces. Even in the grainy infrared view, I could see the sudden shock, the confusion. This wasn't the tearful, relieved reunion they had rehearsed. Ethan? Sarah stammered. "What do you mean?" "It's us. Let us in. It's freezing out here." "Is it?" I mused, deliberately loud enough for them to hear. I glanced at the thermostat display on my console. A perfect 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Feels fine in here. But hey, I'm a generous guy. While you wait, how about some entertainment? I think you'll like this one. It's an old classic. Mark looked at Sarah, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "What the hell is he talking about?" I heard him mutter. He didn't have to wonder for long. With another tap, I activated the secondary external display system. It was a 65-inch weatherproof OLED screen I'd mounted inside a recessed, bulletproof housing right above the door. It was originally intended for displaying warnings or deterrent messages. Tonight, it was getting its premiere as a movie screen. The screen flickered to life, bathing their horrified faces in a cold, digital glow. The image was shaky, low-lit. The audio was filled with muffled, desperate breathing. It was a scene of a dark, cramped cellar. My cellar. In my past life. On screen, I was there, slumped against a concrete wall, unconscious. A younger, dumber, more trusting version of me. Then, the two stars of our show entered the frame. A version of Sarah and Mark from that timeline. They moved quickly, their faces grim and determined in the dim light of a single flashlight. On screen, Sarah didn't look like a damsel in distress. She looked like a vulture. Her eyes were hard as she rifled through my pockets, pulling out the last of our food bars. Mark, my best friend, was efficiently stripping my unconscious body of its winter coat and boots. My gear. The gear that would have kept me alive. "Did you get it all?" Mark's voice, tinny and distorted, came from the speakers. "Yeah," Sarah's voice replied. "The welder is ready. Let's go. We can't waste any more time." The final scene was the most damning. The two of them, working together to drag a heavy steel plate over the cellar door entrance. The hiss and bright flare of a welding torch sealing the edges. Sealing my tomb. The video looped, playing the moment of their ultimate betrayal over and over. A silent movie of their damnation projected onto the night. Outside, the real Sarah and Mark stood frozen, their faces a perfect collage of disbelief and abject terror. Their pathetic little act had been nuked from orbit. The script was gone. The stage was mine. "Recognize this little indie film?" I purred into the mic, my voice dripping with saccharine venom. "It's got a great cast. You two are the stars. I call it How I Murdered My Best Friend for a Can of Soup. Catchy title, don't you think?" Sarah stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. A choked sound, half sob, half gag, escaped her lips. How did you, that's impossible. Impossible? I chuckled. Bruh, I had cameras everywhere in my own house. Did you really think I was that stupid? You thought you could just hit me over the head, steal my shit, leave me to freeze to death, and I wouldn't have a backup? Really? I was lying, of course. The footage wasn't from a camera. It was a memory, a perfect recording, seared into my soul by the arc. But they didn't need to know that. To them, I was just a paranoid genius who had outplayed them at every turn. Mark was shaking his head, his face pale as a sheet. No, that's fake. It's a deep fake. You're trying to mess with us, Ethan? This isn't funny. Oh, I'm not laughing, Mark, I said, my voice dropping back to that icy calm. But this is fucking hilarious. As if on cue, a new character made its entrance. From the edge of the cul-de-sac, a figure shambled into the cone of light from the OLED screen. It was one of them, a feral. It used to be Mrs. Gable from down the street, a sweet old lady who baked cookies. Now, its jaw hung slack, and it moved with that trademark twitchy, unnatural gait, drawn by the sound and light. Sarah's shriek was music to my ears. She pointed a trembling finger. Mark, look! They scrambled back against my reinforced door, the video of their treachery literally playing out right above their heads. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Time for a little systems test, I muttered to myself. I tapped another icon. Exterior illumination, full power. A bank of military-grade LED floodlights mounted on my roof roared to life, bathing the entire front yard in daylight-bright, sterile white light. Sarah and Mark cried out, shielding their eyes. They were completely exposed, pinned like insects under a microscope. The feral, disoriented by the sudden glare, hissed and paused its advance. Let's add some mood music, I said with a grin. I hit the red button labeled Deterrent Horn. An ear-splitting, industrial-grade alarm klaxon blasted through the night. It wasn't just loud. It was a physical force, a sound that vibrated in your bones and rattled your teeth. Sarah and Mark crumpled to the ground, clutching their ears, their faces contorted in agony. This was so much better than John Wick. The effect on the neighborhood was instantaneous. The horn acted as a dinner bell from hell. From the darkness, more shapes emerged. 2, then 3, then a whole damn welcome wagon of ferals. They were all converging on the single point of light and sound in the entire blacked-out city, my front lawn. And standing right in the middle of the buffet were the two people I hated most in the world. Poetic justice was a beautiful thing. I switched off the horn. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the noise. All that was left was the soft hum of my generator, the patter of rain, and the groaning, shuffling sounds of the approaching horde. Sarah, on her hands and knees, looked up, her eyes wild with a terror so pure it was almost sublime. The feral that was once Mrs. Gable was now just 10 feet away, its milky eyes fixed on her. The others were closing in. This was the end of the line. In that final, desperate moment, her true nature surfaced. All the pretense, all the lies, burned away by raw survival instinct. She screamed, her voice tearing through the night, a final, pathetic plea aimed not at the monsters, but at the devil behind the camera. Ethan, I know you still love me. Please, open the door. I'll do anything you want. Her promise hung in the air, a disgusting transactional offer from a person with nothing left to sell but herself. Beside her, Mark looked over at her. His face, illuminated by the floodlights and the video of his own crime, was a twisted mask. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. A flicker of rage, disgust, or maybe, just maybe, the final crushing realization of just how utterly she would discard him the second a better offer came along. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Oh, this was just the beginning. The fun was just getting started. Night 1 of the apocalypse, and I was getting front row seats to the world's most pathetic reality show. Sarah's desperate offer, "I'll do anything you want," echoed from the speakers, dripping with a disgusting last-ditch sliminess. Beside her, Mark's face was a priceless picture of betrayal, the realization hitting him that his partner in crime would trade him for a locked door without a second thought. I leaned forward, tapping the microphone toggle on my console. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. This was better than any premium cable drama. Anything, Sarah? I let my voice purr through the external speaker, a predator toying with its food. That's quite the offer. But you see, I'm a man of simple needs, and right now, what I want is to watch the show. I paused, letting the statement sink in, letting them feel the absolute apathetic void where my emotions for them used to be. The ferals were closing in, their groans, a gruesome chorus getting louder by the second. They had maybe 30 seconds. But, I continued, my voice taking on a magnanimous, game show host tone, I'm not a monster. Not like you two, anyway. I believe in second chances. Or, in this case, a 0.5 chance. I'm going to offer you a lifeline, a choice. I swiveled in my chair and tapped a sequence of commands on a separate keypad. A low hiss of pneumatics sounded from the base of the main gate. A small, reinforced steel compartment, about the size of a shoebox, slid open with a solid thunk. A small interior light flicked on, illuminating the contents. On my monitor, I zoomed in on the compartment. Inside sat 2 items, nestled on a bed of black foam. A sleek, black Glock 19. And next to it, a single pristine bottle of Fiji water. Inside that box is a pistol, I announced, my voice booming across the lawn. And 1 bottle of water. However, the pistol only has 1 bullet in the chamber. 1 single bullet. The two of them stared at the open compartment, then back at each other, the gears returning in their tiny, terrified brains. The rules of the game are simple, I said, unable to keep the glee out of my voice. The first one to the box gets the prize. You can use the bullet on the freaks, or you can use it to eliminate the competition. Either way, only one of you gets to walk away with that bottle of water. Fair's fair, right? You two are a team, after all. I'm sure you can work it out amicably. For a split second, there was absolute stillness. It was the moment the mask didn't just slip. It was violently ripped off and stomped into the mud. The pretense of love, of alliance, of shared history, all of it evaporated in the face of a single bullet and a plastic bottle of water. Sarah moved first. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look at Mark. She lunged, a feral screech tearing from her throat that made the actual feral sound tame. She scrambled on all fours through the mud, her manicured nails digging into the wet grass like claws. But Mark was bigger, stronger, and apparently just as desperate. He roared, a sound of pure rage, and tackled her from the side. They hit the ground in a tangle of limbs, a disgusting heap of flailing, punching, and scratching. It wasn't a fight. It was a brawl between 2 cornered sewer rats. Sarah bit his arm, drawing blood. Mark retaliated by slamming her head into the muddy ground. "It's mine, you bitch," he spat, his voice raw. "You bastard, I was supposed to have it," she shrieked back. I watched, utterly mesmerized, and took another long sip of my ice-cold Coke. The carbonation burned my throat in the best way possible. On the screen above their heads, the video of them working together to seal my tomb was still playing on a loop, a perfect, ironic backdrop to their mutual destruction. Poetic justice was a dish best served on a 65-inch OLED. Mark, using his weight advantage, threw her off him and made a final desperate dash for the open compartment. His fingers closed around the grip of the Glock. He had it. A sick look of triumph twisted his features. Sarah was on the ground, spitting mud and blood, her eyes wide with terror. A feral was now less than 5 feet from her. This was it. The moment of truth. Would he be the hero? Would he use that single precious bullet to save the woman he supposedly loved? The woman he'd helped me for? Nah. I knew better. He didn't even glance at the approaching feral. He spun around, the pistol rock steady in his hand, and aimed it directly at Sarah's head. His plan was brutally simple and utterly predictable. Use her as a living distraction. Let the ferals swarm her while he made a run for it with the water. "Sorry, Sarah," he sneered, a wild grin on his face. "Game over." That was the line. The perfect villain line. It was almost too scripted. But the universe, in its infinite and beautiful sense of humor, had other plans. In his moment of triumph, focused entirely on the woman in front of him, Mark had forgotten the most basic rule of a zombie apocalypse. Always check your 6. From the darkness behind him, a feral that had once been a high school track star launched itself forward. It was silent, fast, and driven by a singular, mindless hunger. Before Mark could even register the new threat, its jaws clamped down on the side of his neck with a wet, sickening crunch. Mark's eyes went wide. The sneer of triumph collapsed into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and agony. A gargled scream tried to escape his throat, but it was mostly blood. The Glock clattered from his limp fingers onto the grass. He was being shaken like a dog treat, his legs kicking uselessly. Sarah saw her chance. She didn't scream for him. She didn't try to help. She scrambled away, crab-walking backward through the mud, her eyes fixed on the unfolding horror with a kind of detached terror. She saw the Glock lying on the ground. She saw the bottle of water still sitting in its compartment. She saw an escape. She lurched to her feet and ran. Not for the gun, not for the water, but for the darkness of the street, away from the floodlights. It was a stupid, panicked move. The world was full of them now. She was just another piece of meat, running into a bigger grinder. She made it about 10 feet before another feral, this one bearing a faint resemblance to a mailman, tackled her from the side, bringing her down hard. Her shriek was high and thin, a sound of absolute finality, abruptly cut off as more of the mindless creatures piled on top of her. I calmly reached for the remote. I switched off the floodlights. I switched off the looping video of their betrayal. The front lawn plunged back into darkness. The only sounds left were the wet, tearing noises of the feast, and the gentle hum of my fortress's life support systems. The show was over. The actors had taken their final bow. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the now black monitors. My heart rate was steady. My breathing was calm. I felt nothing. No, that's not right. I felt a sense of closure. Of a spreadsheet being balanced. They had given me a cold, dark, and lonely death. I had returned the favor in spectacular, high-definition fashion. An eye for an eye. It was only fair. But the event had revealed a critical flaw in my setup. The horn and the lights were effective deterrents. But they were also a giant dinner bell. A neon sign blinking free buffet here for miles around. It worked on 2 idiot traders, but sustained use would draw every feral in a 5-mile radius. I needed quieter solutions. I needed weapons that killed without broadcasting my position to the entire godforsaken city. Arc, I thought, closing my eyes. Instantly, my consciousness was pulled into the vast, sterile white space of my system. The Arc. Before me, holographic screens materialized out of thin air, awaiting my commands. Access all stored blueprints for non-firearm-based weaponry. Prioritize silent, reusable, and low-maintenance designs. A flurry of images and schematics filled my vision. Military-grade crossbows with auto-loading mechanisms. Designs for pressure plate spike traps. Schematics for razor wire nets launched by compressed air. Blueprints for DIY caltrops that could be mass-produced. I had downloaded terabytes of data from military, engineering, and even historical weapon archives in the weeks before the fall. All of it was here, perfectly preserved. Begin fabrication analysis on the Viper tactical crossbow model, I commanded. Use stored carbon fiber and steel alloys. Project the material and energy cost. The system crunched the data instantly. A detailed list appeared. I had enough raw materials in the Ark to outfit a small army. The energy cost for the Southshut function was well within my current reserves. I was mentally planning my new, quieter home defense system when a low, deep groan vibrated through the floor of my command center, pulling me back to reality. I opened my eyes and looked at the main security monitor, which I had switched to a wide-angle view of the front gate. My blood ran a little cold. The handful of ferals that had dealt with Sarah and Mark were just the appetizer. The noise had drawn the main course. The screen showed a sea of bodies. Not a dozen. Not 2 dozen. It looked like hundreds. They were pressing against the gate, a writhing, groaning mass of mindless hunger. The 10-foot-high reinforced steel alloy gate, the one I thought was impenetrable, was visibly bowing inward under their combined weight. Another deep metallic screech echoed through the house as the frame strained against its concrete moorings. Well, I muttered to the empty room, picking up my still-cold Coke. That escalated quickly. The party outside was just getting started, and they were trying to crash my gate. Literally. Day 3 of the Z-apocalypse, and my front gate was groaning like a death metal vocalist warming up. The solid steel alloy, which I'd paid a small fortune for, was visibly bowing inward. On the other side, a mosh pit of hundreds of ferals was trying to get in. Apparently the word was out that my place was the hottest new club in town, and everyone was dying to get on the guest list. Dude, uncool, I muttered to the sea of monsters on my 65-inch screen. The party crashers were seriously harshing my vibe. My Coke was getting warm. This was unacceptable. The grand finale with Sarah and Mark had been a 10 out of 10 masterpiece of karmic retribution, but it had come with a major downside: noise complaints. And in this new world, the only ones who responded to noise complaints were the ravenously hungry undead. A critical flaw, as I'd noted. Time for a software patch. Arc, I thought, not even bothering to close my eyes. Fabrication of the Viper tactical crossbows. Status? Less than fabrication complete. Quantity: 20. Ammunition: 500 bolts, standard broadhead. Ready for deployment. Greater than, the system chimed in my head, as clean and efficient as a Swiss train schedule. Nice. Also, you remember those little automated sentry gun designs I downloaded from that sketchy dark web forum? The ones labeled Backyard Squirrel Defense System V3? Yeah, let's make 4 of those. Use the stored tungsten for the ammo, let's not skimp. The system didn't question the ethics of using military-grade anti-personnel turrets for a squirrel problem. It just worked. While that was cooking, I had a more immediate issue to deal with: I couldn't let them break the gate. The paperwork would be a nightmare, metaphorically speaking. I toggled the view on my monitor to the rooftop cameras. Using a virtual joystick that appeared in my vision, I took manual control of a pre-installed, high-pressure water cannon. Originally for putting out fires, but water is water. Let's see how you guys like a shower. I slammed the ON button. A massive jet of water, pressurized to the point it could strip paint off a battleship, slammed into the writhing mass at the gate. It wasn't a gentle stream. It was a solid battering ram of H2O. Ferals were blasted off their feet, sent tumbling back over their companions like grotesque bowling pins. The sheer force was enough to snap bones. The groan of the gate lessened immediately. It was effective, but it wouldn't kill them. It was a temporary crowd control measure, just enough to buy me some time. A few minutes later, the ARC pinged me. Less than backyard squirrel defense system V3, fabrication complete. Ready for deployment. Greater than. Showtime, I grinned, taking another sip of my now lukewarm Coke. With a thought, 4 sleek, black turrets materialized from my ARC space and dropped into their pre-installed magnetic locks on the 4 corners of my roof. They hummed to life, their optical sensors glowing a menacing red as they self-calibrated. Engage all non-human targets outside the primary perimeter. Firing solution. Headshots only. Let's keep the lawn clean. The turrets swiveled in unison, a silent, deadly ballet. Then came the sound. Not a loud bang, but a series of quiet, rapid-fire PFFF, TPFFF, TPFFFTS. Subsonic tungsten rounds, designed for stealth, left the barrels. On my screen, feral heads began to pop like overripe melons in a slasher film. One after another, they dropped. The turret's targeting AI was flawless, cycling through the horde with terrifying efficiency. In under 5 minutes, the mosh pit was reduced to a pile of twitching corpses. The silence that followed was deafening. The gate, battered but holding, stood firm. And that, I declared to the empty room, is how you deal with noise complaints. I made a mental note to fabricate 1,000 more rounds. I spent the next hour feeling pretty damn good about myself, channel surfing the dead airwaves and using the ARC to souch up a fresh 6-pack of ice-cold beer. The world outside could go to hell, but inside Ethan's fortress of solitude, it was happy hour. That's when I saw movement on a different camera, the one pointed down the street. A new group of zombies? Nope. Worse. Neighbors. About 10 of them, shuffling out from their houses, blinking in the sunlight like moles. And leading the charge, clipboard in hand like she was about to find me for an overgrown hedge, was Carol. Old, nosy, self-righteous Carol, the president of the Homeowners Association and the bane of my existence for the last year. They crept forward, saw the mountain of feral corpses, and then stared at my house. The lights were on. The automated sprinklers for the rose bushes were still working on a timer. To them, it must have looked like an oasis. And they were thirsty. I watched them huddle up. Even from this distance, I could read the body language. Carol was giving some kind of impassioned speech, gesticulating wildly. The others were nodding, their faces a mix of desperation and pure, unadulterated greed. I knew that look. It was the same look I saw in Mark's eyes right before he tried to brain me with a pipe wrench in my previous life. I cranked up the gain on the parabolic microphone pointed in their direction. No, right to hoard all that. Carol's shrill voice cut through the static. In a crisis like this, all resources are community resources. He has a generator. He probably has a pantry full of food. We need to make him share for the good of the group. For the good of the group. Right. I bet that's what the Donner Party told each other before they broke out the salt and pepper. The group, now properly riled up by her commie propaganda, started advancing. They weren't just shambling either. They were armed. A collection of baseball bats, tire irons, and one dude who was weirdly brandishing a croquet mallet. It was the most pathetic-looking lynch mob in history. They ignored the main gate, which was still blocked by a wall of bodies, and headed for the lower, decorative fence that marked the edge of my sprawling lawn. It was a wrought iron thing, more for aesthetics than security. Or so they thought. This was going to be good. I popped open a beer and settled back in my chair, turning up the volume on the external speaker system. As the first one, some dude named Kevin, who drove a ridiculously loud Mustang, reached out to test the fence, I let my voice boom across the lawn, cold and amused. Afternoon, Carol. Is this what you meant by building a stronger community bond at the last HOA meeting? They all froze, looking up at the invisible source of my voice like startled meerkats. Kevin snatched his hand back from the fence. Carol, bless her entitled heart, puffed out her chest. Ethan, thank God you're okay. Turn off this fence and open up. We're out of food and water. You have to share what you have with us. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. Share? I let out a short, humorless laugh that echoed across the lawn. That's funny. I don't remember any of you sharing a cup of sugar with me. I just remember getting fined $200 because my garbage can was visible from the street for 3 hours. So how about no? This isn't the time for petty grievances, young man, she screeched. People's lives are at stake. It's your moral duty. My moral duty is to myself, I said flatly. You've got a 10-second head start to get off my property before I turn on the pest control. That was the wrong thing to say. Kevin the Mustang guy, emboldened by a lifetime of never being told no, spat on the ground. Screw you, Thorne. There's 10 of us and 1 of you. Get the gate. He grabbed the iron bars of the fence with both hands. A couple of other morons followed his lead. Big mistake. I tapped a single key on my console. Pest control engaged. A low hum, and then a brilliant blue arc of electricity jumped from the fence to Kevin's body. There was a sound like a bug zapper the size of a refrigerator hitting a water balloon. Kevin's hair stood on end. His eyes went wide. He convulsed violently, doing a dance that was part break dance, part epileptic seizure, before he was thrown backward onto the grass, smoking slightly and twitching. The other 2 who touched the fence suffered a similar, albeit slightly less dramatic, fate. The rest of the mob scrambled back, screaming and tripping over each other in their haste to get away. The air smelled of ozone and burnt hair. I leaned into the mic one last time. My property, my rules. Stay off the lawn. Then I cut the feed. The show was over, but the entertainment was just beginning. I switched the monitor to a multi-panel view, pulled up a chair to my kitchen island, and proceeded to enjoy a heaping plate of spaghetti and meatballs I had materialized from the ark. The pasta was perfectly cooked, the meatballs were tender, and the red wine was a beautiful Cabernet Sauvignon. On screen 1, Kevin was still twitching. On screen 2, Carol was having a full-blown meltdown, shaking and pointing at my house. On screen 3, the croquet mallet guy had apparently soiled himself and was now hiding behind a bush. It was the best dinner theater I could have asked for. They were living in a horror movie, and I was watching a dark comedy. But as satisfying as this was, it highlighted another problem. This neighborhood was a lost cause. It was full of ferals and, even worse, entitled idiots. The electric fence was a great deterrent, but it was a massive power drain on my generators. Providence, my true fortress in Montana, was waiting. It was time to leave this suburban hellhole behind. After finishing my meal and sauchaping a tiramisu for dessert, I headed down to the garage. There she was. My escape plan. A heavily modified Earthroamer LTI. A beast of a vehicle that I'd bought and then secretly reinforced over the last few weeks. The chassis was reinforced with steel plates. The windows were Lexan polycarbonate, thick enough to stop a rifle round. The tires were military-grade run flats. Inside, it was a mobile command center and luxury apartment rolled into one. ARC, inventory transfer protocol, I commanded. It was time to pack. But I didn't have to lift a finger. With a series of thoughts, I began pulling supplies from the vast emptiness of my ARC space and loading them directly into the RV's storage compartments. Cases of MREs for emergencies. Pallets of bottled water. 10 50-gallon drums of diesel fuel. Crates of ammunition for every firearm I owned. A full medical station's worth of supplies, enough to outfit a small clinic. Then came the good stuff. Crates of frozen Wagyu steaks. A few cases of that Cabernet. An industrial-grade espresso machine. My entire collection of video games and a 4K portable projector. I wasn't just surviving. I was migrating with my entire 5-star lifestyle in tow. The process took less than 30 minutes. The RV was now a self-contained ark of its own, ready to conquer the wasteland. I was just doing a final systems check, ensuring the satellite internet uplink was stable, when a new alert popped up on my wrist-mounted mini-tablet. It was a heat signature warning from one of the exterior cameras. I pulled up the feed. My blood didn't run cold, but I did feel a surge of profound annoyance. The neighbors had regrouped. They had realized a frontal assault was a certifiable way to get a bad perm and a cardiac arrest. So they had resorted to Plan B. The camera was zoomed in on Kevin's house next door. That little shit-stirrer Carol was standing in his driveway, not with a clipboard this time, but with a red can of gasoline. She and 2 other guys were dousing the side of his house. Another one was holding a lit torch, made from a table leg and a rag. The heat signature was from the torch. They weren't just trying to burn his house down. They were setting a fire right next to my property line, hoping the wind would do the rest. They were trying to smoke me out. I watched as the torch was tossed. The gasoline ignited with a loud whoosh, and flames greedily climbed the vinyl siding of the house. A slow smile spread across my face. They thought this would force my hand. They thought it would make me panic. make me run out into their pathetic little trap. They were so wrong. They had just given me the perfect excuse to stop playing defense. "Arc," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I watched the flames grow higher. "Deploy the drones. Non-lethal rounds. Let's get these people's attention." They wanted to play with fire. Fine by me. I was more than happy to show them what a real burn looked like. Night 3 of the world's most violent corporate buyout, and my next-door neighbor's house was putting on a light show that would make a rock concert jealous. The flames, fueled by cheap gasoline and even cheaper human desperation, licked at the night sky. From my leather command chair, I had a perfect view on my security monitors. It was almost pretty, in a catastrophic end-of-civilization kind of way. My parabolic mic was picking up the sound of their chattering. It wasn't the sound of fear. It was glee. That old hag Carol and her lynch mob of homeowners association rejects were huddled behind a minivan down the street, pointing and slapping each other on the back. They thought they'd finally figured it out. They couldn't breach my fortress, so they'd cook me out of it. It was, I had to admit, a classic siege tactic. Unfortunately for them, they were bringing medieval siege tactics to a sci-fi gunfight. "He has to come out now," I heard one of them, the croquet mallet guy, say with a disgusting amount of confidence. "The fire's gonna jump to his roof." "Get your bats ready," Carol's shrill voice ordered. "The moment that door opens, we rush him. He owes us. He owes the community." I took a slow sip of my 20-year-old scotch. The peaty smoke tasted like victory. Community. That word was getting a serious workout today. They were acting like a pack of hyenas who'd cornered a lion, completely failing to understand that the lion was currently sitting in air-conditioned comfort, piloting a dozen drones, and considering which playlist to put on for the upcoming slaughter. "Arc," I thought, my voice a flat line in my own mind. The 4 whisper drones. "Load out. FN 303 pepper irritant rounds. Target the gaggle of idiots behind the blue minivan. Firing solution? Area saturation. Don't hit them directly. I want to create a cloud of pure regret right in their little hiding spot. Less than acknowledged. Deploying tro drones. Payload armed. Executing." "Greater than," the system replied. On my screen, 4 dark shapes detached from the eaves of my roof, their electric motors making less noise than a sigh. They rose silently into the smoke-filled sky, maneuvered into position directly above the minivan, and tilted down. There was no bang, just a series of soft thumps, like a pro golfer practicing his putts. Down below, the effect was immediate. A dozen small projectiles burst mid-air, releasing a fine, nearly invisible cloud of pava powder. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the entire group erupted. They went from smug conspirators to a flailing mass of agony in less than 3 seconds. They clawed at their eyes, choked on air that suddenly felt like it was made of ghost peppers and fire ants, and stumbled around blindly. Their shrieks were music to my ears, a beautiful counterpoint to the crackling flames. The dude with the croquet mallet dropped it and started rubbing his face in the grass like a dog with an itch, which only made it worse. Total rookies. But the entertainment was just the appetizer. The fire was the main course. It was indeed getting close to my property line. The heat was triggering my external temperature sensors. Time to put it out. Did they think I hadn't planned for fire? Bruh. I live in California. Fire is practically a season. With a single tap on a touchscreen icon labeled car wash, I activated my masterpiece of overkill engineering. It wasn't a sprinkler system. Sprinklers are for keeping lawns green. This was a perimeter fire suppression system, pilfered from aircraft hangar design specs, and fed directly by a massive high-pressure pump connected to a 1,000-gallon underground water tank I'd had installed under the guise of an eco-friendly rainwater collection system. A series of nozzles, hidden in the base of my fence and along the roofline, popped open. Then came the deluge. It wasn't rain. It was a solid wall of water, blasting outwards with enough force to strip bark from trees. The section of Kevin's house that was burning was hit by a directed torrent that extinguished the inferno in seconds, leaving behind a steaming, blackened mess. The roaring blaze was snuffed out like a birthday candle. But I didn't turn it off. Oh no, that would be a waste of good water pressure. I swiveled the roof-mounted cannons, using my virtual joystick, and aimed them directly at the cloud of coughing, sputtering morons. I hit the full power button. The blast of water hit them like a freight train. It wasn't a refreshing shower. It was a physical blow. Carol was lifted off her feet and sent skidding down the asphalt. The others were tumbled around like socks in a washing machine set to vengeance, their pathetic collection of baseball bats and tire irons scattered across the street. The screaming changed from pained choking to shocked, freezing panic. It was beautiful. And then, the dinner bell truly rang. This whole spectacle, the roaring fire, The sudden whoosh of the water cannons, the symphony of moronic screaming, had been broadcast across the dead silent suburbs for a solid 10 minutes. In the New World, that wasn't just a disturbance. It was a dinner invitation written in bold, flashing neon letters. My motion sensors at the end of the block went insane. My long-range audio picked up the sound. That familiar, wet, guttural snarling. And it wasn't just a few. It was a lot. The previous horde was just a scouting party. This was the main event. I switched to the night vision camera facing the main road. My jaw didn't drop, but my respect for the sheer magnetic pull of stupidity went up a notch. A river of ferals was pouring into our cul-de-sac, hundreds of them. Their eyes glowed in the infrared, a tide of hungry predators, drawn to the sound of splashing, helpless prey. My neighbors, now soaked to the bone, shivering, and still half-blind from the pepper rounds, were just starting to get their bearings. Kevin, the original idiot who touched the fence, staggered to his feet, water pouring from his clothes. He saw the fire was out. He saw his friends scattered and broken. And then he saw the approaching wave of death. The look on his face was a priceless work of art. The dawning horror. The realization that their brilliant plan hadn't just failed. It had actively summoned their own executioners. Carol, lying in a puddle, let out a shriek that could shatter glass. That sound, pure and undiluted terror, was the final signal. The front line of ferals broke into a dead sprint. The scene on my monitor descended into chaos that would have made Hieronymus Bosch say, "Whoa, tone it down a bit." My former neighbors, the self-righteous community builders, were now just panicked meat sacks caught between an unmovable fortress and an unstoppable horde. They ran. They slipped on the wet asphalt. They screamed for help. They screamed for me. "Thorn, for the love of God, open the gate," one of them wailed. I leaned back in my chair, took another sip of scotch, and turned up the volume on the external speakers. I didn't say anything. I just played a little music. The jaunty, upbeat theme from a classic video game, something utterly inappropriate for the carnage unfolding. Let them have a soundtrack for their demise. This was the ultimate lesson of the apocalypse, a lesson they were learning just a little too late. Noise gets you killed. Stupidity gets you killed faster. Stupidity combined with noise is a one-way ticket to becoming an undead Happy Meal. And as satisfying as it was to watch Carol get dragged down by 3 ferals while trying to climb the very minivan she'd hidden behind, I knew this was my exit cue. This neighborhood was officially a hot zone. The sheer number of ferals turning the cul-de-sac into an all-you-can-eat idiot buffet meant the area was compromised beyond recovery. It was time to go. Providence was waiting. I cut all the external systems, plunging the front yard back into darkness, save for the flickering streetlights and the hellish tableau they illuminated. The jaunty music cut out, leaving only the sounds of the feast. I stood up, stretched, and walked to the internal elevator, heading down to the garage. The elevator doors opened onto a pristine, white epoxy floor, and there it sat, my real ark, the Earth Roamer. It wasn't just an RV, it was a declaration of war against the apocalypse. Bathed in the cool LED light of the garage, its matte black, armor-plated shell seemed to drink the light. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a predator waiting to be unleashed. Final checks complete. All systems nominal, I said to myself, climbing into the captain's chair in the driver's cabin. The interior smelled of new leather and high technology. A flick of a switch brought the dashboard to life, a bank of screens showing GPS, long-range thermal imaging, and system diagnostics. ARC, seal all external compartments. Engage primary engine sequence. The vehicle hummed to life, a low, powerful thrum that vibrated through the floor. It was the sound of a sleeping dragon waking up. On one of the screens, I saw the chaos outside had not subsided. Ferals were everywhere, and mixed in with them, a few of the stragglers from Carol's crew were still trying to fight or flee, their pathetic struggles only attracting more attention. I keyed in the command for the main garage door. A loud klaxon blared for a few seconds, a final get out of the way that no one outside could possibly appreciate. Then, the multi-panel reinforced steel door began to rise, revealing the horror movie outside. I flipped on the exterior light array. A million lumens of pure white LED light blasted out from the light bars on the roof and grille, turning night into day. The ferals in the direct path recoiled, hissing and shielding their eyes. The humans just froze, caught like deer in the headlights of an oncoming apocalypse. I didn't hesitate. Putting the massive vehicle into drive, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The Earth Roamer, All 30,000 pounds of it lurched forward. It rolled out of the pristine garage, over the manicured driveway curb, and onto the street of nightmares. There was a series of sickening, wet crunches as the military-grade tires met flesh and bone. I didn't look back to see what I'd hit. Ferals, neighbors, it didn't matter. They were obstacles. They were part of the mess I was leaving behind. Through the bulletproof windshield, my path was clear. The RV tank plowed forward, an unstoppable force, parting the sea of ravenous bodies, like a steel-pated Moses. Their claws and teeth scraped uselessly against the armor. A few tried to leap onto the hood, only to be swept aside or crushed under the wheels. I navigated through the carnage, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, the GPS locked onto a single destination hundreds of miles away. Providence, Montana. Home. This pathetic suburban chapter of my new life was over. The real story was just beginning. Day 4 of the New World Order, starring The Walking Dead and a handful of idiots who hadn't gotten the memo yet. The interstate was a ghost town's parking lot. For miles, it was just me, my Earth roamer, which I'd mentally nicknamed the Unstoppable Juggernaut, and thousands of abandoned cars, forming a multi-lane metal tomb. The vibes were, to put it mildly, post-apocalyptic chic. Inside my cabin, it was another world. The AC was humming, keeping the interior a perfect 72 degrees. A lo-fi hip-hop mix was playing softly through the Bose sound system. My survival dashboard was projected onto a secondary screen, a beautiful neon blue map overlaying the real-time GPS. It highlighted high-density feral zones in angry red and potential human ambush points in a cautionary yellow. It was like Waze, but for avoiding getting eaten. My route to Montana was a soothing green line, carefully threading the needle through the chaos. I reached into the air and my hand phased into nothingness. A moment later, I pulled out an ice-cold can of Dr. Pepper from my ARC space. Sipping it, I watched the scenery crawl by. A family sedan, doors wide open, with a child's teddy bear lying forlornly on the asphalt. A tanker truck jackknifed across 3 lanes. Outside, it was a montage of desperation. Inside, it was a road trip. The contrast was, no cap, my favorite part of this whole world-ending gig. This was the life I'd bled for, the comfort I'd earned with foresight, and a complete lack of misplaced sentimentality. About 100 miles outside of what used to be Boise, the dashboard pinged. A yellow zone, right ahead. A classic highway overpass ambush point. My long-range thermals confirmed it. A handful of heat signatures hiding behind a rusty Ford F-150 parked sideways across the only clear lane. Amateurs. ARC, give me audio from the forward parabolic mic, I thought. The lo-fi hip-hop faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind and the crackle of a crappy walkie-talkie. CIM? Big black truck, coming slow. That ain't a truck, you moron. That's a goddamn house on wheels. Gotta be loaded. You ready, Cletus? Born ready. The nails on the board are sharp. Nails on a board. Wow. I was being threatened with medieval tech. It was almost insulting. My screen zoomed in. I could see them now. 4 guys. They looked exactly like you'd expect. Greasy hair, unwashed clothes, and the kind of dead-eyed stare that screamed, "My gene pool is a puddle." One of them was holding a plank studded with rusty nails. Another was holding a pump-action shotgun like it was a magic wand that could solve all his problems. The leader, I guessed, was the one leaning against the truck, trying to look cool and failing spectacularly. Let's be real. In the old world, these guys were probably the type to get into arguments with cashiers over expired coupons. Now, with society's guardrails gone, they thought they were post-apocalyptic warlords. It was adorable, in a pathetic way. The shotgun wielder stepped out from behind the truck, making a brave show of it. He pumped the shotgun, a sound meant to be intimidating but just sounded clumsy. He waved the barrel at me. "Stop the vehicle! Get out with your hands up! We just want your gas and food!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Don't make this ugly!" Oh, honey. It was already ugly, you just hadn't realized it yet. I didn't slow down, I didn't speed up, I just took another, calm sip of my soda. My thumb hovered over a large, friendly-looking red button on my central console. The button was labeled, Ramming Speed. It was a custom macro I'd programmed for just such an occasion. It didn't just slam the accelerator. It locked the suspension, reinforced the front bumper's kinetic plating, and started blaring Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries through the external speakers at 150 decibels. Because if you're going to be overkill, you might as well be classy about it. The shotgun dude's face went from confident to confused as the 30,000-pound juggernaut kept its pace. 200 feet. The guy with the nail plank looked nervously at his boss. 100 feet. The boss man started waving his hands, looking genuinely panicked now. 50 feet. The shotgun dude finally realized I wasn't stopping. His eyes widened into dinner plates. It was a beautiful moment of comprehension. I pressed the button. The Earth roamer didn't accelerate. It launched. The deep hum of the diesel engine became a guttural roar that shook the very air. The opening chords of Wagner's masterpiece blasted out, a soundtrack for their sudden and violent education in physics. The shotgun guy just had time to let out a squeal that sounded like a stepped-on chihuahua before he dove out of the way. Smart move, but too late for his ride. The impact was less of a crash, and more of a deletion. My armored front bumper, a solid slab of reinforced steel, connected with the F-150's flank. Physics took over. The pickup, which they thought was an impassable barrier, folded like a cheap suit. It was lifted off the ground and tossed aside like a kid's toy, spinning through the air before slamming into the concrete overpass support with a sound like a giant crumpling a beer can. The other bandits were caught in the shockwave of debris and pure force. The nail plank guy was sent tumbling head over heels. The boss man, who had been leaning against the truck, simply vanished in the explosion of metal and plastic. I think I saw a boot fly past my window. Or maybe it was a shoe. Details, details. I didn't slow down. The Earth roamer plowed through the wreckage without so much as a shudder. A few pathetic thunks echoed against the hull as their small arms fire bounced harmlessly off the armor plating. On my rearview camera, I saw the survivors picking themselves up, staring in absolute disbelief at the smoking crater where their brilliant plan used to be. The music faded out as I cleared the overpass, leaving them in a stunned, Wagnerless silence. Problem solved. Total time elapsed, 7 seconds. Ammunition spent, 0. That was efficiency. That was the new gospel according to Ethan Thorne. Stupidity is a pre-existing condition, and the apocalypse is the cure. An hour later, I was cruising through a stretch of farmland. The highway was clearer here. The human element was more visible. I saw them, small groups of people walking along the shoulder of the road. They were gaunt, dirty, their eyes hollowed out by fear and hunger. They carried their life's possessions in plastic bags and backpacks. When the juggernaut rumbled past, they'd stop and stare, a mixture of awe, envy, and terror on their faces. They were the sheep, and the world was now full of wolves. I felt nothing for them. Pity was a luxury, a dead weight that would get you killed. They had failed to prepare, and now they were paying the price. My eyes, however, were always scanning for opportunities. And then I saw it. Tucked away in a ditch was a military Humvee, the up-armored M1114 variant. It looked like it had hit a patch of black ice or swerved to avoid something and rolled. Its occupants were long gone, a few scattered shell casings the only sign they'd ever been there. But the vehicle itself, that was treasure. I pulled the Earth roamer over a safe quarter-mile down the road and deployed a perimeter drone to circle the area, just in case. Then I focused my attention on the wreck. Ark, can you get a clear scan from this distance? Less than negative. Signal degradation due to distance and angle. Recommend direct physical interface or close proximity scan. Greater than, the system replied in its cool, neutral tone. Sigh. Field trip. I slipped on a light tactical vest, grabbed a rifle just in case, and jogged down the empty highway. The air stank of decay and dust. Up close, the Humvee was a thing of beauty. Even wrecked, its design philosophy was clear. Function over form, survivability above all else. The armor was a composite material, thick and angled. The tires, though one was blown out, were clearly run flats. This was an upgrade. I placed my hand on the hull, the metal cool under my palm. Arc. Scan and copy all non-biological components. Prioritize the armor composition schematics and the run-flat tire system. The ring tattoo on my hand glowed with a faint blue light. A wave of data flooded my mind. Material analyses, engineering blueprints, stress test results. It was like downloading a PhD in military vehicle design in 5 seconds. Less than scan complete. Composite armor M1114 blueprint acquired. Run-flat tire system blueprint acquired. Stored in the Ark, under upgrade schematics. Greater than. I grinned. As soon as I got to Providence, Izzy, my future genius engineer, assuming I could find her as planned, was going to have a field day with this. We could use the Ark's replicator to fabricate armor panels and slap them on the Earth roamer, turning it from a fortress into a mobile God King's chariot. Jogging back to my vehicle, I felt a sense of profound satisfaction. This was how you win. Not by cowering in a bunker, but by constantly moving, consuming, and improving. You become the apex predator by absorbing the strengths of everything you overcome. Back in my command chair, I wiped down my rifle, stowed it, and grabbed a pre-packaged snack bar from the Ark. It was chocolate-covered peanut butter. Delicious. I was about to cue up my music again when a new alert flashed on my survival dashboard. It wasn't red or yellow. It was a pulsating white icon. Less than emergency broadcast signal detected. Source: St. Jude Regional Hospital. Low power. Encrypted medical channel. Repeating message. Greater than. The system displayed. I frowned. A hospital? Most were either overrun feral nests or stripped bare death traps by now. I was about to dismiss it as background noise, another ghost in the machine. But then, the system cross-referenced the signal's origin point with the data from my past life. A new line of text appeared below the alert, and my blood ran cold for a second before turning into calculating ice. Less than analysis. High probability of signal originating from Dr. Amelia Hayes. GPS coordinates match last known location from previous timeline. Greater than. Dr. Amelia Hayes. One of the top trauma surgeons in the tri-state area. In my past life, I'd heard stories about her on the survivor radio nets. A woman who held a hospital ward for weeks against the horde, saving dozens of people before her position was finally overrun. A woman of immense skill, resilience, and integrity. A person I had flagged in my memories as a high-value asset. I pulled up the map. St. Jude was about 60 miles ahead, a slight detour off my main route. The area around it was painted in a threatening shade of crimson, indicating a massive feral population. A death trap. Going there was a stupid, reckless risk. But the reward? A top-tier doctor for my flourishing empire? A medic who could patch up my people, research the Z virus, maybe even develop treatments? That wasn't a risk. That was an investment. I looked at the road ahead, a grin spreading across my face. Ark, I said aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet cabin. Change of plans. Plot a course for St. Jude's Hospital. The soothing green line on my GPS wavered, then redrew itself, heading straight for the heart of the Crimson Zone. The rescue mission was a go. Day 6 of the Z-apocalypse. My GPS, now a real-life horror game map, was lit up like a Christmas tree from hell. The area around St. Jude's Regional Hospital wasn't just a red zone. It was a throbbing, pulsating crimson that basically screamed, "You're going to die here." According to the Ark's drone feed, there had to be, at a conservative estimate, 1,000+ ferals shambling around the hospital complex. It looked like a Black Friday sale, where the only thing on offer was getting your face chewed off. Any sane person would have seen that map, said nope, and driven straight to Canada. But I wasn't sane. I was ambitious. And inside that concrete death trap was a legendary tier loot drop. Dr. Amelia Hayes. All right, Juggernaut, time for your debut as a rock star, I muttered, taking a long pull from a bottle of Fiji water I'd pulled from the Ark. I could feel the clean, crisp hydration flowing through me. Outside, the world was dying of thirst. The flex was immaculate. I brought up the command console. The plan was simple, loud, and incredibly stupid if you didn't have a 30,000-pound armored middle finger to wave at the laws of physics. Ark. External sound system. Cue up Rip and Tear from the Doom soundtrack. Maximum volume. My lo-fi chill-hop mix was instantly replaced by the kind of high-octane, demon-slaying heavy metal that makes you want to punch a hole through a planet. The Juggernaut rumbled in anticipation. I didn't drive towards the main entrance. That was for chumps. I drove straight for the emergency room ambulance bay, where the feral concentration was thickest. They turned as one, a sea of dead eyes and gaping mouths, their collective groans drowned out by the incoming auditory apocalypse. My foot didn't just press the accelerator, it stomped on it. The Juggernaut, my beautiful black beast, roared to life. This wasn't ramming speed, like before. This was the get-the-hell-out-of-my-way protocol. The first few dozen ferals didn't stand a chance. It wasn't a fight. It was bowling, and I was throwing a 30,000-pound ball. Bodies were tossed into the air like rag dolls in a physics engine glitch. The impact sounds were a disgusting, wet percussion section accompanying my heavy metal symphony. I plowed through the horde, carving a path of destruction straight to the ambulance bay doors, and slammed the reinforced bumper against the concrete wall right next to them. I killed the engine. The music cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was instantly filled by the enraged screaming of hundreds of ferals. They swarmed the Juggernaut, clawing uselessly at its armored shell, banging their fists against the bulletproof windows. From the outside, it probably looked like a suicide mission. From the inside, sitting in my leather captain's chair, it looked like a live nature documentary about the world's dumbest predators. Phase 1 complete, I thought, grabbing my prepped go bag. The bait is set. I slipped out through the rooftop escape hatch, silent as a shadow. On my back was a lightweight pack with water, medkits, and high-energy food bars. In my hands was a Heckler & Koch MP5 SD, the integrated suppressor making it whisper quiet. I flipped down the quad-nod night vision goggles. The world turned a grainy, tactical green. While the horde was having its little temper tantrum with my empty RV, the other side of the hospital was almost peaceful. Almost. I rappelled down the side of the building and slipped through a broken window into a maintenance corridor. The air inside was thick with the smell of antiseptic and rot. A classic apocalypse potpourri. Moving through the hospital was like speedrunning a horror level I'd already played. My past life's vague memories, now sharpened by the ARC system, highlighted danger zones and feral hiding spots on my mental map. A janitor's closet on the left? Feral inside. I didn't even break my stride. Foot. Foot. 2 suppressed shots. A silent drop. A nurse's station ahead? 3 of them, feasting on what was left of a security guard. I popped around the corner, aimed and executed a perfect triple tap. Head, head, head. No spray and pray, just cold, hard efficiency. These things weren't people. They were obstacles. Annoying, fleshy NPCs blocking my path to the real prize. Amelia's emergency broadcast was coming from the 3rd floor surgical wing. The elevators were dead, obviously, so I took the stairs, clearing each landing with practiced ease. The further up I went, the more evidence of a last stand I saw. Crude barricades made of gurneys and office furniture. Spent shell casings littered the floor. These people had put up a fight. Respectable for amateurs. Finally, I reached the surgical wing. The double doors were barricaded from the inside with a massive X-ray machine and several heavy-duty equipment carts. I could hear panicked whispers from within, and the relentless, dull thud of ferals trying to break down a service door at the far end of the hall. No way I was making a racket trying to get through the main door. I checked my mental map. There, an adjoining doctor's lounge with a connecting door to the pre-op area. I found the lounge, its door surprisingly unlocked. Inside, a single feral, a doctor by his tattered white coat, was mindlessly clawing at a vending machine. Poor guy probably just wanted one last Snickers. I gave him a quiet, merciful exit with a single shot to the back of the head. The connecting door to the pre-op was locked. A simple lock, though. A quick jab with my combat knife and the mechanism popped. I eased it open. And there they were, the last survivors. Doctor. Amelia Hayes stood in the center of the room, her face smudged with dirt and blood, her blue scrubs torn at the shoulder. She held a small pistol with a grip so white-knuckled I was surprised it didn't turn to dust. Her brown hair was a mess, but her eyes, even in her exhausted state, were sharp and defiant. Flanking her were 2 younger nurses, one clutching a fire extinguisher like a warhammer, the other armed with a scalpel and a whole lot of terror in her eyes. They were backed into the corner, their gazes fixed on the vibrating surgical suite door, where the thudding was getting louder. They were on their last legs, running on fumes and fear. They didn't even notice me until I cleared my throat. All 3 of them spun around, weapons raised, eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. Amelia's pistol leveled at my chest. "Don't move," she said, her voice strained but steady. "Who are you?" I didn't raise my rifle. I just stood there, a picture of absolute calm. My tactical gear was pristine. My NVGs were flipped up on my helmet. I probably looked like I'd just walked off a movie set. The contrast between me and their desperate, grimy state was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. "I'm the guy who answered your radio call," I said, my voice deliberately casual. I reached into a pouch on my vest, moving slowly. "And I'm guessing you're thirsty." I tossed a bottle of Dasani at her feet. It skidded across the linoleum floor and stopped right in front of her. The 3 of them stared at the bottle of water like it was the Holy Grail. The clear plastic, the condensation on the outside, the sealed cap. In a world where clean water was a fantasy, I had just thrown it on the floor like it was nothing. It was the ultimate power move. Amelia didn't lower her gun, but her focus wavered. The nurse with the fire extinguisher looked like she was about to cry. "You're alone?" Amelia asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and suspicion. Thud. Crack. A splintered crack appeared in the surgical door they were guarding. "For now," I said, my eyes flicking to the door. "But those guys are getting impatient. My ride outside is keeping the main party busy, but we don't have all day. I'm here to get you out." I unslung my MP5 SD and pointed to the 2 nurses. "You 2. Stay behind me. Dr. Hayes, you've got point. Call out any medical supplies you think are irreplaceable. We're going shopping on our way out." My confidence was infectious. The sheer absurdity of my clean, well-equipped appearance, and my calm, shopping suggestion in the middle of this hellscape, was enough to break through their fear-addled state. Amelia finally lowered her pistol, her shoulders slumping in a wave of relief so profound it was almost a physical blow. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay." I tossed her a chocolate peanut butter power bar. "Eat this. You look like you're about to fall over." She caught it, fumbling slightly, staring at the pristine wrapper, as if it were an alien artifact. This, right here, was why I did this. The look on their faces, awe, gratitude, and a sliver of fear at the kind of person who could be so comfortable in this new world, was better than any five-star meal. With the immediate threat of the surgical door dealt with by me wedging a metal cabinet against it, our shopping trip began. Amelia, revitalized by the food and the sudden appearance of hope, became a woman possessed. She moved with purpose, directing me through the abandoned wings. We need a crash cart. The defibrillator on that one is top of the line. The portable ultrasound machine in imaging room 2. And the entire stock of broad-spectrum antibiotics and morphine from the pharmacy. I didn't argue. Arc, open up. As she pointed out equipment, I'd walk over, place a hand on it, and the object would simply vanish into thin air, stored safely in my infinite dimensional space. The nurse's jaws hit the floor the first time they saw it. Amelia just shook her head, a weary but impressed smile on her face. At this point, she was done being surprised. A guy shows up looking like a special forces operator, hands out bottled water, and has magic powers? Sure. It's Tuesday in the apocalypse. The rescue mission made one thing crystal clear. My Providence Fortress needed a serious medical upgrade. First aid kits were for scraping your knee. What I needed was a goddamn hospital wing. We made it to a lab filled with advanced tech. Amelia's eyes lit up. That's a Roche Cobus 8,000 feet modular analyzer, she said, her voice filled with a reverence usually reserved for religious icons. It can run hundreds of blood tests at once. We could use it to track the virus's progression, test for immunity. With this, I could actually do something. This was it. The jackpot. Not just a piece of equipment, but a key to unlocking future research. All right, good find, I said, placing my hand on the cool metal casing of the massive machine. Arc, scan, and copy blueprint. I braced for the familiar influx of data. Instead, a sterile, synthesized voice echoed in my mind. Less than scan initiated. Insufficient energy for blueprint replication of complex machinery. Current energy, 12%. Required energy, 35%. Please recharge the ARC system. Greater than. I froze, my hand still on the machine. Shit. I'd been running the Juggernaut, the drones, the AC, the mini fridge. And on top of that, the scan and copy function was a massive energy hog. I'd been using it on small things, tires, armor schematics, but a piece of high-tech medical equipment on this scale was a different beast entirely. My system's battery, which I hadn't even thought about, was critically low. Amelia saw the look on my face. What's wrong? Minor technical issue, I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. The thrum of the feral horde outside suddenly sounded a lot closer. My ride's battery needs a jump. In the middle of a dead city, surrounded by 1,000 zombies, with no power grid and a setting sun. So, I thought, looking at the useless multi-million-dollar analyzer, how the hell do you find a charging station in the middle of Armageddon? Day 7 of the Z-apocalypse. My infinite cosmic cheat code of a storage system was flashing a low battery icon in my head. Freaking hilarious. I had the power to casually violate the laws of physics, but apparently, it still needed to be plugged in overnight like a cheap smartphone. The Juggernaut, my 30,000-pound angel of death, was a power-hungry beast, and I'd been living the high life with AC, music, and drone surveillance. The scan and copy function was the real energy vampire, though. Trying to digitize that Roche Cobus 8,000 feet analyzer was like trying to download the entire internet on a dial-up connection. It had almost bricked my system. So, no charge, no copying the cool toys, I muttered to myself. This was a classic high-level gamer problem. Epic loot locked behind a resource wall. Amelia, and her 2 tag-along nurses, whose names I hadn't bothered to learn yet, were watching me. The initial high of being rescued was wearing off, replaced by the grim reality of our situation. They looked at me like I was their god, which was fair, but right now their god needed to find a divine-tier USB port. What's the plan? Amelia asked, her voice regaining some of its clinical authority. She'd finished the power bar and the water and now looked less like a victim, and more like a doctor who was annoyed at a procedural delay. We can't stay here. The horde you distracted will eventually find a way in. I clapped my hands together once. Right, plan. The hospital has a heart, and we're going to give it a jump start. The 2 nurses looked confused. Amelia's eyes narrowed. The backup generators. Bingo, I said, giving her a finger gun. In the sub-basement. Big, loud, stinks of diesel, and powerful enough to light up a small town. Or, in our case, charge my equipment. The nurse holding the fire extinguisher, I decided to call her Extinguisher Girl, paled. The basement? But that's where they were taking the first bodies. It has to be crawling with them, I shrugged. Probably, but they don't have a multi-million-dollar modular analyzer down there, do they? We go down, flip a few switches, I juice up, and then we go on the multiverse's most insane shopping spree. Simple. My complete lack of concern seemed to short-circuit their fear response. It was my superpower. When you act like walking into a nest of monsters is as casual as a trip to Costco, people tend to either think you're a god or completely insane. Either way, they usually follow. "Give me your pistol," I said to Amelia. She handed it over without hesitation. I checked the magazine, then handed it back. "You and Scalpel Girl stay here and guard the gear we've already piled up. Extinguisher Girl, you're with me. You know how to use that thing?" I nodded at the heavy red cylinder she was clutching. She shook her head, terrified. "Point, pull the pin, squeeze the handle. Aim for the head. It's not just for fires anymore. Let's go." The descent into the hospital's guts was a trip. The air got colder, thicker, smelling of concrete dust and something metallic and unpleasant, like old blood. The emergency lights were flickering, casting long, dancing shadows that made everything look like a budget horror film. For Extinguisher Girl, it was probably terrifying. For me, it was just Tuesday. My NVGs painted the world in shades of tactical green. The ferals down here were different, slower. They'd been trapped in the dark for a week, their movements less frantic, more predatory. They were lurking, not swarming. The first one, a former orderly, shambled out from behind a laundry cart. Before Extinguisher Girl could let out one of those eardrum-shattering shrieks, my suppressed MP5 SD went foot-foot. The orderly dropped like a sack of laundry himself. "Keep up," I said, not even breaking my stride. We moved through the maze of boiler rooms and maintenance tunnels. I was a ghost. They were just targets. A feral would lurch from a side passage. I'd double-tap its skull. Another would drop from a tangle of pipes overhead, and I'd put a round through its eye socket before it hit the ground. It wasn't a fight. It was pest control. Extinguisher Girl eventually stopped trying to scream and just watched, her knuckles white on the extinguisher's handle, her eyes wide with a strange mix of terror and awe. Finally, we found it. A huge, cavernous room housing 3 massive diesel generators, each the size of a small truck. The glorious, beautiful heart of the hospital. "There's our baby," I said, slapping one of the giant green machines. A thick layer of dust puffed up. The control panel was covered in a web of emergency stop buttons, gauges, and switches. My past life knowledge as a doomsday prepper who spent way too much time on engineering forums kicked in. This was a standard hospital backup system. Failsafe, redundant, and built to be started by a nurse in a panic. Of course there was a problem. A fat, bloated feral in a maintenance uniform was wedged in the main fuel line valve assembly, its arm caught in the mechanism. It was still twitching, groaning pitifully. It was blocking the final switch. "Ugh, seriously?" I sighed. "Customer service in this place is a joke." Extinguisher Girl looked like she was going to be sick. "All right, new plan," I told her. "Go stand by the main breaker over there. When I yell, you throw that giant switch up, got it?" She nodded dumbly. I walked over to the stuck feral. It snarled at me, snapping its teeth. I didn't waste a bullet. I grabbed it by the back of its greasy overalls and just pulled. With a sickening, wet tearing sound, the arm ripped clean off at the shoulder, staying tangled in the valve. The feral landed in a heap, writhing. I stomped on its head with my combat boot. A wet crunch, and it was still. Gross but efficient. I wiped my boot on a nearby rag. I cranked the fuel valve open, hit the primer sequence, and then slammed the big green start button. The generator sputtered for a second, then roared to life with the sound of a dragon waking from a 1,000-year nap. The noise was apocalyptic. The floor vibrated. The few working lights in the room flickered and then blazed with full, glorious power. "Now!" I bellowed over the engine's roar. Extinguisher Girl, bless her little terrified heart, threw the main breaker. Power surged through the hospital's grid. "Good job!" I yelled, giving her a thumbs up. "You're promoted to Breaker Girl." I unzipped a pouch on my vest and pulled out what looked like a high-tech jumper cable. One end had a heavy-duty industrial clamp. The other end, however, was a series of fine, silvery filaments that terminated in a flat magnetic port. Amelia would have been fascinated. Breaker Girl just looked confused. I clamped one end onto the generator's main output bus bar. Sparks flew. Then I walked over to my right hand, rolled up my sleeve, and slapped the magnetic port directly onto the compass tattoo on my hand. It clicked into place. The connection was instant. A brilliant blue light traced the lines of the compass, and I felt a jolt of pure, raw energy surge into me. It wasn't painful. It felt incredible, like chugging a gallon of espresso mixed with lightning. The low battery warning vanished from my mind, replaced by a rapidly climbing percentage bar. Less than external power source detected. Commencing rapid recharge. Current energy, 14%, 25%, 40%, greater than. The roar of the generators was attracting every feral on the lower levels. I could hear them banging on the heavy steel door. "Time to go," I said, my voice buzzing with a slight vibrato from the energy intake. I grabbed Breaker Girl by the arm and we bolted. She didn't need any encouragement. Back on the third floor, Amelia and Scalpel Girl were holding the line, looking nervous. The sound of the generators was faintly audible even up here. "What was that?" Amelia demanded. "It sounds like the world is ending." "Nah," I said, grinning. My system was at 98% and climbing. "That's the sound of opportunity." I walked over to the Roche-Cobas 8,000 feet analyzer, the machine that started this whole mess. I placed my hand on it again. "Arc, scanning copy blueprint. Less than energy level sufficient. Blueprint scanning. 10%, 50%, 100%. Blueprint Roche-Cobas 8,000 feet acquired and stored. Replication cost, 30% energy. Greater than." A perfect, three-dimensional schematic of the machine appeared in my mind. Success. But I wasn't done. Oh, I was just getting started. "All right, ladies," I announced, turning to the three of them. "The shopping spree is officially on, and we're clearing the shelves." I didn't even wait for a reply. I placed my hand on the massive analyzer. "Arc, store item." The multi-million-dollar, 2-ton piece of medical equipment vanished into thin air. The three women stared at the empty space, their mouths hanging open. Even Amelia, who had seen me do it with smaller things, was flabbergasted. That's not possible," Scalpel Girl whispered. "Welcome to the new world," I said cheerfully. "Now, Amelia, you're the expert. You're my personal shopper. Where's the good stuff? I want it all." What followed was not a rescue mission. It was a heist. It was a looting spree of such epic proportions that it would have made Viking raiders blush. Amelia, snapping out of her shock, embraced her new role with a terrifying efficiency. Her initial hesitation melted away, replaced by the fervor of a scientist given an unlimited budget and a magic moving company. "The pharmacy!" she'd yell, and we'd march down there. I didn't bother with boxes. I just put my hand on a shelf. Floop! An entire shelf of broad-spectrum antibiotics, gone. Floop! The morphine and high-grade painkillers, gone. Floop! Anesthetics, saline drips, suture kits, syringes. The entire pharmacy was stripped bare in less than 5 minutes, leaving behind nothing but empty shelves. "Surgical wing! Next!" she commanded. Crash carts, defibrillators, portable X-ray machines, ventilators, heart-lung machines. One by one, they vanished into the arc. We didn't just take the portable stuff. I laid my hands on the massive, bolted-down MRI machine. Foop! Gone! The CAT scanner. Foop! Gone! The nurses stopped being scared and started getting into it, pointing things out. "Oh, don't forget the autoclaves for sterilizing equipment. The ultrasound machines in maternity are newer." This was the ultimate face slap to the apocalypse itself. While the world outside was dying from a scraped knee, I was looting an entire state-of-the-art hospital to give my future fortress a medical wing that would be the envy of the pre-collapse world. The sheer, unadulterated power of it was intoxicating. I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing to live like a king. "We can't just leave the beds," I declared, looking at an empty ward. "My people deserve comfortable recovery options." I walked down the line, my hand brushing over each bed. Floop, floop, floop. An entire 30-bed ward, including the bedside tables and IV stands, disappeared. By the time we were done, the hospital was a ghost of its former self, a hollowed-out shell, stripped of anything valuable. We had, in the span of about an hour, acquired enough medical equipment and supplies to run a small city. The future Providence Medical Center was going to be legendary. As we finally made our way back towards the ambulance bay and the Juggernaut, I noticed something through a grimy window. It had started to rain. Not just a drizzle, but a thick, heavy downpour that hammered against the glass. The sky was a bruised, ugly purple-gray. I checked the ARC's environmental display. Less than warning, unprecedented barometric drop. Flash flood advisory for all low-lying areas. Greater than. Right on schedule. Phase 2 of the end of the world was loading in. The Great Deluge. This was going to make things messy. We piled back into the Juggernaut, the nurses practically vibrating with adrenaline and disbelief. I fired up the engine, its roar a comforting sound against the storm. The ferals still clawing at the outside were buffeted by the wind and rain, looking even more pathetic than usual. I was about to put the RV in gear and plow our way out when a pair of powerful headlights cut through the deluge, pinning us in their glare. My hand froze on the gear shift. Through the rain-streaked windshield I saw them. A 2.5 military truck, followed by a heavily armored Humvee. They screeched to a halt, boxing us in. Soldiers in wet combat gear disembarked, rifles at the ready, fanning out to surround us. An officer, his uniform soaked but his posture ramrod straight, stepped into the headlights' glare. He had a stern, weathered face, and the cold eyes of a man who was used to giving orders and having them obeyed. He looked at the juggernaut, and then his eyes narrowed on its front. My custom-built, reinforced ramming bumper was welded onto a frame I'd liberated from a wrecked military vehicle just like his. He keyed the microphone on his shoulder. His voice, amplified and metallic, cut through the storm. This is Major Crane of the U.S. Army Provisional Command. That is government property on your vehicle. By the authority granted to me under the National Emergency Act, I am hereby commandeering your vehicle and all supplies within it for the war effort. He pointed a finger directly at me. Exit the vehicle with your hands in the air, now. Day 7 of the Z-apocalypse, and I've already got the government on my ass. Or what was left of it, anyway. Seriously, can a guy not even complete a post-apocalyptic shopping spree in peace? This officer dude, standing in the rain like he was posing for a recruitment poster, had the kind of face that was just begging to be slapped. He was projecting so much self-important authority that it was practically a physical force. Major Crane, he called himself. Major Clown was more like it. Exit the vehicle with your hands in the air. Now, he repeated, his voice booming artificially through his little shoulder radio. Inside the juggernaut, the mood instantly dropped 50 degrees. Amelia's face, which had been glowing with the giddy high of our little heist, was now a mask of cold fury. The two nurses, Breaker Girl and Scalpel Girl, looked like they were about to have a panic attack. They just escaped one nightmare only to be boxed in by another. I, on the other hand, was just bored. Annoyed, even. I looked at the soldiers fanning out. They had good gear, M4s, tactical vests, the whole 9 yards, but they looked spent. Their uniforms were soaked through, their faces gaunt under their helmets, and their movements screamed exhaustion. They were running on fumes and misplaced patriotism. They were a show of force with no force left to show. What do we do? Amelia whispered, her hand instinctively going to the pistol in her lap. Relax, I said, leaning back in my ridiculously comfortable captain's chair. I took a slow sip of the still cold water from my hydro flask. The ice cubes clinked. I made sure they clinked loud enough for my own satisfaction. Let the man have his monologue. He's probably been practicing it in the mirror. Outside, the major was getting impatient. This is your final warning. We will use force. I sighed dramatically. This was getting tedious. I keyed the external intercom on the juggernaut. My voice, crystal clear and amplified by speakers far superior to his, boomed out into the storm. Force? Buddy, you in what army? Oh, right, that one. A few of the soldiers flinched. The major's face tightened. He clearly wasn't used to being talked back to. I continued, my tone dripping with condescending pity. Listen, I appreciate the cosplay, I really do. It's very convincing. But let's get a few things straight. You're demanding I hand over quote, government property? I let out a short, humorless laugh. Which government? The one that couldn't stop a glorified flu from turning 99% of the population into rabid meth heads? The one whose leaders are probably either zombie chow or sunning themselves in a bunker in New Zealand? That government? The rain hammered on the juggernaut's roof. My words hung in the air, slicing through the major's bravado. His soldiers were glancing at each other now, their resolve visibly cracking. I was saying what they were all thinking. Your authority, Major, I said, my voice dropping to a low, conversational tone that was somehow more threatening, comes from those rifles in your hands. It's the only law left in this world. And that's fine, I respect that. But there's a problem with your logic. I leaned forward and pressed a large, unmarked red button on my custom dashboard, labeled Negotiation. There was a low hydraulic hiss from the roof of the juggernaut, a sound that cut cleanly through the roar of the storm. On top of the massive RV, 2 armored panels slid open with terrifying smoothness. Rising from the recesses were 2 fully automated, remote-controlled turrets. Each one cradled a GAU-19/A, a goddamn 3-barreled electric Gatling gun. The barrels began to spin with a low, hungry whir, the targeting lasers painting a dozen dancing red dots on the chests of the surrounding soldiers. The effect was instantaneous. It was like I'd hit a pause button on reality. Every soldier froze solid. Their eyes, wide with pure, unadulterated terror, were locked on the monstrosities that had just appeared on my RV. They weren't looking at a prepper's toy anymore. They were looking at a weapon of war that made their M4s look like water pistols. The Major, I'm just going to call him Deckard now. He had big Lieutenant Deckard from Blade Runner energy, all pomp and no substance. His jaw was literally hanging open. His final warning died in his throat. My problem, I said, my voice now echoing with the calm of a god, is that my guns are much, much bigger than your guns. The soldiers looked like they were about to piss themselves. One kid, couldn't have been more than 19, actually lowered his rifle a few inches. Deckard shot him a venomous glare, but it had no heat. How do you order men to charge a walking fortress that could turn them into pink mist in under 3 seconds? You don't. But I wasn't done. The face slap had to be total. It had to be demoralizing. It had to be a work of art. You see, I said into the intercom, you guys are thinking in terms of what you can carry. A few magazines, a day's worth of MREs. It's a very limited, very sad way of thinking. With one hand, I flicked a stud on my glove. In a barely perceptible shimmer of displaced air, a brand new military-grade Barrett M82 sniper rifle materialized in my lap. I casually racked the bolt. The sound, a heavy metallic clack-clack, was obscenely loud in the sudden silence of their minds. Me? I don't have that problem. I made the Barrett vanish. It was replaced instantly by an AT-4 rocket launcher. I hefted it onto my shoulder, peering through the sight and aiming it playfully at the Humvee behind Deckard. So, I asked, my voice cheerful, are we going to continue this pissing contest? Because I'm happy to measure, but I don't think you're going to like the results. This was the moment. The beautiful, glorious moment of a complete system-wide psychological reboot on their end. They weren't soldiers facing a civilian anymore. They were starving peasants who had just tried to mug God, and God had responded by showing them the blueprints for the Death Star. Inside the juggernaut, the nurses were holding their breath. Amelia was just staring at me, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a woman who had just realized she'd hitched her wagon to the right horse. A crazy, ridiculously overpowered, apocalyptic warhorse. I made the rocket launcher disappear and leaned back again. Now, I'm a reasonable man. The world's ended, we're all just trying to get by. So I'm not going to turn you and your crew into a modern art installation on this highway. Deckard finally found his voice. It was hoarse. Raw. What? What are you? I'm the guy who spent the last hour looting this entire hospital, I said brightly. I have MRI machines, entire pharmacies, and enough surgical equipment to build a Frankenstein monster army in my, well, let's just call it my trunk. You, on the other hand, look like you haven't eaten a hot meal in a week. Your men are exhausted. That war effort you mentioned? It's over. You lost. The zombies, the floods, the sheer epic failure of your command structure. They won. I let that sink in. I watched the fight drain out of them, replaced by the grim, hollow-eyed acceptance of defeat. This was exactly the kind of encounter that made me realize my plans for Providence needed an upgrade. Dealing with ferals and small-time looters was one thing. But organized, armed groups, even broken ones like this, they were a different kind of threat. They'd probe, test, and if they sensed any weakness, they'd attack. The turrets were a good start, but I needed layers. I needed minefields. I needed a level of automated defense that would make an entire battalion think twice. This little roadside standoff had just become a very productive strategic planning session. So here's the deal, Deckard, I announced. I'm going to drive away from here. You're going to let me. In exchange for your stunning display of good sense, I'm going to do you a favor. I made a gesture to Amelia. She understood immediately, her eyes gleaming. She got up and walked to the back of the juggernaut. A moment later, she came back and gave me a nod. I put my hand on the dashboard. Floop. Outside, on the wet asphalt right in front of Deckard's boots, 10 large cardboard boxes appeared out of thin air. The side of the boxes read, MRE, Meals Ready to Eat. Property of U.S. government. The irony was delicious. That's 120 meals, I said. And 5 cases of medical-grade antibiotics. Enough to feed your men for a few days and patch up Kaigi do infections of yours. A gift. From me to you. The soldiers stared at the boxes like they were an oasis in the desert. Their hunger was a palpable thing, overriding their fear. I saw one of them swallow hard. Deckard looked from the boxes of food to me. The cogs were turning in his head. The humiliation was warring with the primal need to provide for his men. He was a proud man, but his pride wasn't going to fill their stomachs. He finally stood up a little straighter, his military bearing returning, but it was brittle now. You may have more guns, he said, his voice hard as steel, even though he knew he had no cards left to play. But we have numbers. There are other units regrouping. Command is trying to re-establish comms. You're making an enemy of the United States Army. I almost laughed. It was pathetic. A threat wrapped in desperation. The United States Army? I replied, my voice flat. Dude, look around. You are the United States Army. All 30 of you, standing in the rain, starving. There's no cavalry coming. I let my gaze sweep over his men, then back to him. Your choice, Deckard. Take the food, and live to fight another day, maybe find a nice little farm to settle down in. Or stand here on your principles, while your men starve, and I drive away anyway. What's it gonna be? You want to be a commander, or you want to be a memory? Day 7, Part 2. The After Party. Deckard, or Major Clown as I'd mentally redubbed him, stood there trying to puff up his chest, projecting an authority he no longer possessed. My Gatling guns were still humming, their hungry barrels aimed at his exhausted troops, and the 10 boxes of MREs sat on the asphalt between us, a monument to his failed leadership. He was a king with no castle, no army, and no leverage, still trying to read a royal decree. The United States Army? I said, letting the sheer stupidity of his statement hang in the air for a moment. I leaned into the intercom, my voice dripping with the kind of pity you'd reserve for a toddler throwing a tantrum. Dude, look around. You are the United States Army. All 30-ish of you, standing in the pouring rain, about to eat your own boots. There's no cavalry coming. There's no air support. There isn't even a working Taco Bell left in this country, and you're talking to me about the chain of command? I saw it then. The flicker of doubt in the eyes of his soldiers. They weren't looking at him for orders anymore. They were looking at the food. They were doing the simple, brutal math of the new world. Pride versus protein. And protein was winning by a landslide. Deckard's face was a mask of thunderous rage. His entire identity was being systematically dismantled by a guy in an oversized RV. You'll regret this, he growled, a promise as empty as their stomachs. We will. He never finished the sentence. Movement. A blur to his left. It wasn't me. It wasn't my turrets. It was one of his own. A female soldier, shorter than the rest, with sharp Korean features and eyes that held a chilling emptiness, stepped forward. Her movements were brutally efficient. There was no wasted motion. In one fluid sequence, her rifle butt slammed into Deckard's solar plexus, forcing the air out of his lungs in a sharp gasp. As he doubled over, the side of her hand chopped down hard on the back of his neck. He crumpled to the wet asphalt like a cheap suit, out cold before he even knew what happened. The other soldiers froze, their rifles half raised, their expressions a mix of shock and, dare I say it, relief. Big yikes for the Major's career. The woman didn't even look at the man she just dropped. She let her M4 hang on its sling and calmly met my gaze through the Juggernaut's reinforced windshield. Her voice, when it came, was steady and devoid of emotion. It cut through the rain with the sharpness of a razor blade. His pride was going to get us all killed. We aren't soldiers anymore. We're survivors. We need food, medicine, and shelter, not speeches. She took a deliberate step forward, boots crunching on the gravel. Those guns on your roof say you have the means to provide that. My team and I are tired of dying for a ghost. We want to live. I leaned back in my chair. Inside the Juggernaut, Amelia and the 2 nurses were dead silent, their eyes wide. They were watching a coup, live and in high definition. I, however, was having a moment of pure, unadulterated déjà vu. I knew this woman. In my past life, after the world had gone completely to hell, her name was a legend whispered in the darkest corners of survivor camps. A ghost who could slip through zombie hordes and fortified compounds alike. They called her Spectre. An ex-Special Forces operator, betrayed by her own unit during the initial chaos. Left for dead, only to re-emerge as one of the most lethal solo operatives on the continent. I'd only ever heard stories. Now the living myth was standing a few feet from my front bumper, essentially filling out a job application. This was better than finding a pallet of gold. This was finding the person who could guard the gold. My plans for Providence just got a massive upgrade. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I keyed the intercom one last time. A practical woman? I like that. I paused, letting the moment stretch. Welcome aboard, Spectre. Her reaction was perfect. For the first time, that icy composure cracked. Her eyes widened just a fraction, a visible flicker of shock. No one was supposed to know that name. It was a call sign from a life that was technically classified, a life that had ended weeks ago. I had just demonstrated that I knew things I shouldn't know. It was a better display of power than any gun, It established mystery. It established that I wasn't just some lucky prepper, I was something else entirely. The rest of you, I said, my voice booming out to the other stunned soldiers. Spectre here is your new CO. Her first order of business is a vibe check. Anyone still feeling patriotic and wanting to follow Captain America into glorious starvation, you're free to go. Anyone who prefers hot meals, a dry bed, and not getting eaten by meth head zombies, take 2 steps forward. It wasn't even a contest. 24 soldiers, almost the entire remaining squad, took 2 very deliberate steps forward. They lowered their weapons. A few men, who were obviously Spectre's direct subordinates, immediately moved to secure the unconscious Deckard and the 5 loyalists who remained frozen in place, looking utterly lost. The Simp Squad. Excellent choice, I chirped. Maya, I said, using her real name now, amplifying the effect. Relieve the major of his command, and all his gear, his sidearm, his vest, his rifle, his radio. The keys to that sad-looking Humvee, too. Oh, and his boots. Leave him the socks, I'm not a total monster. Maya nodded, her face unreadable again, but I saw the understanding in her eyes. This wasn't just about loot, it was about ritual. It was about public, irreversible humiliation. She gestured to 2 of her men, and they efficiently stripped Deckard of his authority, piece by piece, piling it on the ground. The 5 loyalists were similarly disarmed. My door hissed open. I stepped out into the rain, the drops sizzling and evaporating a foot away from me. A subtle flex of a personal energy shield the Arc system was running. It was a minor feature, but the psychological impact was major league. I looked at God stepping out of his chariot. I walked over to the pile of gear and casually scooped it all into my inventory with a flick of my wrist. Whoop! Gone! The soldiers gasped. Even Maya's professional mask slipped for a second. I then materialized a single C-Rat can of beans and a plastic fork, tossing them onto the ground next to Deckard's snoring form. For his 5 little followers, I generously spawned a single granola bar each. Go find your government, I said, my voice flat. Tell them Ethan Thorne sends his regards. I turned to Maya. Get your people and their gear loaded into their truck. We're leaving. She didn't hesitate. You heard him! Move! She barked, and the 24 soldiers scrambled with a purpose they hadn't shown under Deckard's command. They were a broken unit a minute ago. Now they had hope. Or, more accurately, they had me. Back inside the Juggernaut, the atmosphere was electric. Amelia was looking at me like I had just turned water into wine. You just staged a military coup from your driver's seat and recruited an entire Special Forces squad. Technically, she staged the coup, I corrected, settling back into my chair and grabbing a cold soda from the mini-fridge. I just provided the motivation, and the benefits package is much better over here. We have dental. The 2 nurses, Breaker and Scalpel, were still processing. One of them, I think it was Scalpel, whispered. He made their guns disappear, into thin air. Girls, you'll learn rule number 1 around here pretty quick, Amelia said, a dangerous grin on her face. Don't question the magic. Just enjoy the ride. A few minutes later, Maya appeared at the door of the Juggernaut's cabin. She was soaked, but she stood ramrod straight. Behind her, I could see her my new, soldiers efficiently organizing themselves in their transport truck, their movements sharp and professional. The transformation was insane. It was the difference between a team that was being led and a team that was just being told what to do. Sir, she said, her voice crisp. My team is accounted for. 24 soldiers, all with prior combat experience. I have 5 specialists, 2 communications techs, 2 combat engineers, and 1 medic. We are ready for your orders. At ease, Maya. Welcome to the winning team, I said, gesturing for her to come in out of the rain. First, let's establish our own chain of command. You're now the head of security for the Providence Project. Providence? She asked, her eyebrow raising slightly. My base, our new home. It's a fortress in Montana. Your job will be to turn it from a fortress into an impenetrable bastion of comfort and civilization. You'll be in charge of training everyone, planning patrols, setting up kill zones, and generally making sure that no one like Major Clown ever gets close enough to be an annoyance again. A flicker of something I hadn't seen before crossed her face. For the first time, she looked, not just relieved, but truly hopeful. She had been a weapon without a purpose. I had just given her a mission that mattered. Understood, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Spectre, I said. Now, for your first assignment. We're still on a supply run. I need top-tier talent. Your last intel dump before the world went sideways. Anything juicy in there? Any assets? Any high-value individuals who might be trapped in this area? Maya paused, her eyes glazing over for a second, as she accessed her own mental hard drive. Her training was impeccable. The world fell apart fast, sir. Most of the grid went down within 72 hours. But the last authenticated FBI all-points bulletin I intercepted before our comms failed. They were closing in on a high-level black hat hacker, a ghost in the machine. They'd been chasing her for 2 years. My interest peaked. A top-tier hacker would be invaluable. They could bypass electronic locks, decrypt data, and, most importantly, manage the complex software suites I planned for Providence's defense grid. A name? Just a handle, sir, Maya replied. They called her Izzy. According to the bulletin, her last known location was a fortified server farm she turned into a personal bolt hole. It was at an old power substation about 60 miles from here. I grinned. It was a wide, predatory grin that made Amelia chuckle and Maya stand just a little bit straighter. It was all falling into place. The board was set, and my pieces were getting stronger with every move. Well, Spectre, I said, putting the Juggernaut in gear as our new military truck fell in line behind us. Looks like we're going on a scavenger hunt. Plot a course for that substation. Let's go recruit a wizard. Day 28. Homecoming. The airdrop recruitment of Izzy had been, to put it mildly, an absolute cakewalk. Turns out, the fastest way to an Uber hacker's heart isn't through romance. It's through a guaranteed supply of flamin' hot Cheetos and the promise of a gigabit fiber connection that doesn't buffer. She had been holed up in her server farm fortress, a gremlin queen, reigning over a kingdom of humming silicon. When I showed her the schematics for Providence's command center on a tablet, she practically teleported into the Juggernaut's passenger seat. All it took was a single whispered phrase, no lag. Easy peasy. Now, with our new tech wizard secured and mildly catatonic from the sheer joy of seeing the outside world again, the real journey was ending. We were in Montana. The Great Deluge was no joke. For the last 300 miles, the world had been trying to drown itself. The rain was biblical, turning roads into shallow rivers and washing out entire sections of highway. For any other vehicle, it would have been game over. For the Juggernaut and its new military escort, it was just an inconvenient car wash. Approaching the turnoff, sir, Maya's voice crackled over the comms, professional as ever. Roger that, I replied, a grin spreading across my face. I could feel the anticipation in the cabin. Amelia was practically bouncing in her seat. Izzy had her face pressed against the window, her usual screen-tanned pallor replaced with genuine curiosity. This was it. The payoff. I steered the Juggernaut off the main dilapidated road and onto a narrow, unmarked gravel path that immediately began to climb into the foothills. The path was intentionally designed to look like nothing, a forgotten service road leading to a dead end. After a mile of winding through dense, dripping pine forest, the valley opened up before us. And there it was. Spanning the entire width of the narrow valley entrance was a solid wall of steel. 10 meters high, featureless, painted a dull gray that blended with the stormy sky. It wasn't a gate, it was a statement. It screamed, "Go away," in a way no simple sign ever could. Mother of God, one of the soldiers muttered over the open comms channel. I let them soak it in. I keyed my personal comms. Providence Command, this is Big Papa. Open sesame. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hydraulic hum that you could feel in your teeth, a vertical seam appeared down the middle of the wall. The two massive halves began to slide silently and smoothly into the mountainside, revealing the valley beyond. The contrast was staggering. Outside the gate, the world was a chaotic brown and gray mess of mud and storm. Inside, it was an oasis of impossible green. A pristine asphalt road led towards a large, modern-looking farmhouse and a massive barn, both nestled at the base of the surrounding mountains. The fields weren't muddy and flooded. They were covered in healthy green grass, crisscrossed by unseen drainage systems. It looked peaceful, it looked normal. But my people weren't idiots. They could feel the truth of the place. Maya saw it first. Perimeter sensors, she said, her voice tight with professional appreciation. Disguised as fence posts. Thermal imaging cameras under the farmhouse eaves. And are those sprinkler heads in the lawn? Or something else? Pop-up automated turrets. 50 caliber, I said casually, enjoying the collective sharp intake of breath from the comms. The whole lawn is basically a giant kill box. Welcome home, everyone. As our two-vehicle convoy rolled down the pristine road, the great steel doors slid shut behind us, sealing us off from the dying world. The sound of the storm was instantly muffled, the valley's unique geography creating a pocket of relative calm. It felt like stepping into another dimension. I parked the Juggernaut in front of the oversized barn and hopped out. The air here was clean, crisp, smelling of wet pine and rich earth instead of decay. My new team disembarked, their faces a mixture of awe, disbelief, and raw, unfiltered shock. These were hardened soldiers who had seen the absolute worst of humanity and the apocalypse. Now they were standing here, looking like a bunch of kids on their first trip to Disneyland. The vibe check was immaculate. "All right, house tour," I announced, clapping my hands together. "Wipe your feet, we just had the floors done." I led them not to the farmhouse, but to the barn. Inside, it looked like a high-end garage and workshop. Clean, organized, with tool chests lining one wall and parking for the juggernaut and their truck. But the main attraction was in the center of the floor. I pressed a button on a discreet wall panel. A large section of the reinforced concrete floor descended silently, revealing a brightly lit staircase leading down into the earth. "After you," I said with a grand gesture. The first thing that hit them was the air. It was warm, dry, and circulated, carrying the faint, pleasant scent of clean laundry. The stairway opened into a wide, central corridor that looked more like a luxury hotel than a doomsday bunker. Soft, indirect lighting, polished wooden floors, tasteful art on the walls. Amelia was the first to break the stunned silence. She reached out and touched a wall, as if to confirm it was real. "Ethan, what is this?" "This," I said, unable to keep the pride out of my voice, "is Phase 1 of Providence. Living quarters." I pointed down a hallway. Private rooms for everyone, each with its own bathroom, a real bed with a memory foam mattress, and a hot shower that never runs out. "Go on, take a look." A few of the soldiers, hesitantly at first, then with increasing speed, peeled off to look. A moment later, a joyous shout echoed back down the hall. "It has a toilet! A real flushing toilet!" That simple, primal cry of joy was more satisfying than any military victory. It was the sound of hope being restored. I led the core group, Maya, Amelia, and Izzy, further in. "Medical wing," I said, pushing open a set of double doors. Amelia audibly gasped. It wasn't a room. It was a state-of-the-art clinic. Operating theater with a surgical robot, quarantine rooms, diagnostic equipment I had liberated from a private hospital's unbuilt new wing, and shelves upon shelves of medicine, all neatly organized and cataloged. Her eyes, which had seen so much horror in her collapsed hospital, filled with tears. I can save people here," she whispered. "That's the idea, Doc," I said softly. Next, I took them to my personal favorite. Another set of heavy doors hissed open, and we were hit by a wave of warm, humid air and a blast of UV light. Before us lay a cavernous space, the size of a football field, filled with rows upon rows of lush, green plants growing in vertical hydroponic towers. The sound of circulating water was a gentle symphony. "The garden," I announced. "Complete environmental control. We can grow anything from tomatoes and lettuce to medicinal herbs. Enough to feed 500 people indefinitely." The soldiers who had followed us just stood there, speechless. They'd been fighting over moldy cans of beans. Here was a literal forest of fresh food, safe beneath tons of rock and steel. The psychological impact was a knockout blow. All lingering doubt, any thought that I was just some lucky guy in a big truck, evaporated. They weren't just following a leader anymore, they were following a savior. Finally, the grand finale. The command center. It was Izzy's turn to have her religious experience. The room was a semicircle, dominated by a huge central screen that currently showed tactical readouts of the entire valley. Surrounding it were banks of servers, individual workstations, and enough processing power to make NORAD look like a child's toy. Dual redundant geothermal power, satellite uplink with a custom-built decryption suite, and a closed-loop fiber network connecting every system in the facility, I explained, watching Izzy's eyes glaze over with pure, unadulterated nerdlust. "This is your new office, Izzy, the brain of Providence?" She slowly walked to the main console, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she breathed, all pretense of cool disdain gone. She was home. I turned to Maya, whose face, for the first time since I'd met her, was completely stripped of its icy composure. She was staring at the tactical display, her strategist's mind visibly processing the layers of defense, the firing arcs of the turrets, the choke points. "You said you wanted a fortress?" she said, her voice filled with a reverence I hadn't thought her capable of. "Sir, this isn't a fortress. This is the endgame, and you're the one who's going to run its defenses," I told her. "This is your kingdom, Spectre. I want patrol schedules, training regimens, and kill zone simulations running by tomorrow. I want every one of your soldiers to know this place like the back of their hand. Make it impenetrable." A fire lit in her eyes, a sense of purpose so intense it was almost frightening. "Understood," she said, her voice crisp and clear again, the shock replaced by cold, hard resolve. No one gets in. The next few hours were a blur of productive chaos. Maya immediately took charge of her soldiers, who moved with a newfound energy, assigning barracks, and setting up a chain of command. Amelia began the monumental task of organizing her new clinic, humming a tune for the first time in a month. Izzy plugged herself into the command center and became one with the machine, her fingers flying across keyboards as she began integrating their salvaged military comms into Providence's secure network. I finally allowed myself a moment of peace. I retreated to my personal quarters, a spacious suite with a view of the hydroponics garden through reinforced glass, and took the single greatest hot shower of my 2 lifetimes. For the first time since my rebirth, a feeling of absolute security washed over me. This was it. I had done it. I had built heaven in the middle of hell. I was just toweling off, contemplating what kind of steak to have for dinner, when a calm, synthesized female voice echoed through the suite. Alert! Unidentified aerial vehicle detected. Perimeter Sector 4. I froze. My head snapped towards the intercom. Izzy? What's the visual? Putting it on your suite's main screen now, sir, Izzy's voice replied, a new tension in her tone. The large screen on my wall, which had been displaying a peaceful forest scene, flickered to life with a drone's eye view. It showed a patch of forest just beyond the valley's ridge. Pushing through the trees was not a single vehicle, but a convoy. 5 armored trucks, a large mobile command center, and 2 light assault vehicles. They were well-equipped, organized, and moving with purpose. They weren't scavengers. The drone zoomed in on the lead truck, pushing past a low-hanging branch. For a second, the image was blurry, but then Izzy's software sharpened it into crystal clarity. There, on the side of the truck door, was a logo, a stylized double helix wrapped around a globe. Amelia's voice, now patched into the command channel, was a horrified whisper. No, it can't be. My blood ran cold. I knew that logo. Everyone on the planet knew that damn logo. It had been plastered all over the news for the first 72 hours of the outbreak, before the news stopped broadcasting. It was the logo for the Omnigen Corporation, the mega corporation that had designed the Z-Plague, and, through a catastrophic containment failure, had personally gift-wrapped the apocalypse for the entire human race. And they were right on my doorstep.